never thought I would find myself sprinting down dark aisles, chasing flickers of movement that vanished the second I turned my head. That was before I started working nights in that old warehouse. The first night seemed normal. I walked the floors, I checked locked doors, and I sat in front of the security monitors sipping stale coffee. But around midnight on my third shift, everything changed. Since then, I've been stuck in a loop of tension and uncertainty, always waiting for something I can't quite see. I never feel relaxed. I never feel safe. Every noise puts me on edge. Every shadow feels alive. Now, I spend each shift on high alert, eyes darting from one camera feed to the next, heart thumping whenever a light flickers in the corridors. I got this job through a temp agency that handles security contracts for factories and storage facilities. They offered me night work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I needed the money, so I took the position without asking too many questions. The place is in an industrial district nobody talks about. I barely see cars out there. The roads are filled with potholes. There are old streetlights that flicker and buzz, and the wind carries a smell of damp concrete and rotting metal. My assignment is a sprawling warehouse complex that used to store machinery and parts. Only one building still has some occasional activity, but they rarely move anything in or out these days. The rest of the space looks abandoned. There are endless corridors of empty shelves and racks. Some boxes sit in the corners, coated in thick dust and spider webs. The floor is cold and rough. When I walk, my boots echo. Sometimes I feel like I'm hearing another set of steps right behind me, but I turn around and see nothing. My only company is a single set of security monitors in a cramped office near the entrance. There's a small heater that barely works and a desk lamp that flickers now and then. The night air creeps in through gaps in the windows. The place feels forgotten. On my first couple of nights, I tried to explore every inch of the warehouse just to get familiar with the layout. I used a flashlight because half the overhead lights don't work. I saw rows of empty shelves, broken pallets, cracked crates, and old machine parts scattered around. Some sections smelled like mold, others smelled like rust. I saw water dripping from the ceiling in one spot. A few times I heard rats scurrying in the dark. It was quiet but not peaceful. The silence felt heavy. The corridors seemed to stretch forever. I got lost twice during those early rounds. I had to retrace my steps, following my own footprints on the dusty floor. By the third night, I stuck to a simpler routine. I'd do a pass around the main corridors every hour, then watch the cameras in the office. That's when I first noticed something off with the motion sensors. They're set up to switch on these small emergency lights in certain zones if there's movement. Normally, I walk through and a light flips on, then flips off a minute later. But that night, the light started flickering in places I hadn't been. The sensor in the loading bay went off 3 times in 15 minutes, even though I was nowhere near it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe rats triggered them, or there was a wiring problem. But each time it happened, I felt a knot in my gut. I decided to investigate. I walked down the main corridor toward the loading area. The overhead lights were dead, so I relied on my flashlight. My footsteps sounded louder than usual. I felt exposed. My breath felt shallow. As I approached the big rolling door in the loading area, I heard something that sounded like a footstep on concrete, followed by a slow, ragged exhale. I froze. My hand tightened on the flashlight. My eyes darted around, but the beam landed on boxes and crates, nothing else. Then I swung the light to one corner and saw a tall shape pressed against the wall. It looked at least 7 feet tall, maybe a bit more. I saw a narrow head, long limbs. I couldn't see details because my flashlight caught its face at a weird angle, but I noticed something about the eyes. They reflected red for an instant, like an animal's eyes in the dark. I felt my stomach drop. My hands went cold. I took one step back, and the shape shifted like it was turning to face me. I caught the glint of those eyes again. I didn't even think about challenging it. I just turned and ran. I didn't scream. I couldn't get a sound out. My legs felt shaky, but I sprinted all the way back to the security office. Inside, I slammed the door, locked it, and went straight to the monitors. I cycled through the camera feeds, checking each angle of the corridor and the loading area. Nothing moved. I rewound the footage, but it showed no sign of that figure. It just showed me entering the area, shining my flashlight, and then running back. I saw no second form, no shadow, no person. I felt sweat on my forehead. I realized my heart was pounding like a drum. I told myself maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe a stack of crates looked like a figure in the dark, or maybe some weird reflection happened. But the memory of those eyes wouldn't leave my mind. I stayed in the office for the rest of the shift, only stepping out when I had to do a final walkthrough in the early morning. By then, the sun was coming up. The light made me feel a bit safer. I found nothing unusual in that corner. The crates were stacked the same way, and there was just a dusty patch of wall where I thought I saw it. I finished my shift, drove home, and tried to get some sleep. My mind kept replaying the image of that tall shape. The next night I arrived with a plan to keep a closer eye on the monitors. Around midnight I saw the motion sensor lights flicker in the same loading area. I walked over to check. This time, I held my flashlight in one hand and my phone in the other, thinking I could snap a picture or record a video if I saw anything. The corridor was silent, except for a faint dripping sound. My boots crunched on bits of broken concrete. The closer I got to the loading area, the more my skin prickled. The hair on my arms stood up. My breathing went shallow again. I forced myself forward. I stepped into the space, shined the light around, and saw only crates, a forklift, and some empty wooden pallets. A chill breeze blew in from a gap near the rolling door. My eyes scanned every corner. Nothing moved. No footsteps, no breathing. I let out a long exhale, relieved but still uneasy. Then the emergency light overhead flickered. I flicked my flashlight upward and caught a glimpse of something that looked like a foot or a leg slipping behind a stack of crates. It was gone so fast I couldn't be sure. I rushed over, shining my light behind the crates. Nothing. I checked all around them. Nobody was there. I returned to the office and reviewed the footage. The camera angle covered most of the area, but again, I only saw me walking around. No second figure, no sign of movement. The system recorded me shining my flashlight around, looking confused, then leaving. I didn't see anything else. My mind raced. Could it be a glitch in the cameras? I toggled the night vision filters, the motion detection logs, everything I could think of. No luck. This pattern repeated almost every night for the rest of the week. The motion sensors would trip, lights would flicker. I'd hear footsteps or strange breathing. I'd catch glimpses of something tall but never get a clear look. Each time the cameras showed nothing. I started sleeping during the day with a baseball bat next to my bed. I felt paranoid. At work, I'd grip my flashlight so tight that my knuckles turned white. My stomach churned with stress. One night around 2 a.m., I decided to set up my phone in a hidden spot in the loading bay, hoping I could record something. I placed it on top of a crate, aimed it at the corner where I first saw that figure, and let it record. I left it there for an hour while I roamed other corridors. I came back, grabbed the phone, and hurried to the office to watch the footage. Most of it showed an empty corner with the occasional flicker of the overhead light. But at the 37-minute mark, I noticed a slight movement at the edge of the frame. I leaned in, my heart thumping. It was just a shadow passing across the back wall, shifting in a smooth, vertical line, then disappearing. No shape, no face, no definite form. Just a shadow that looked too big to belong to any normal person. That was enough to give me chills, but it wasn't conclusive. It could have been the angle of the light or something else. Still, it made me feel less crazy. I reported these incidents to my supervisor at the temp agency. They told me to note everything in my log but didn't seem interested. They said the warehouse owners had no money for repairs or better equipment. As long as the doors remained locked and there were no break-ins, they didn't care if a light flickered or if the cameras missed something. They told me to keep showing up, do my rounds, and file a daily report. That was all they wanted. I tried to bring a friend in with me one night, off the clock, just for a second set of eyes. The boss found out and said it was against company policy to have unauthorized personnel on the premises. So I'm alone here, night after night, pacing the corridors, checking the cameras, and hoping that if I see this thing again, at least I can catch it on video or maybe confront it. But deep down, I don't really want to confront it. Whenever I think about those red eyes, my hands start shaking. Lately, I spend most of my shift in the office, staring at the monitors. I keep the lights off in the room, except for the glow from the screens. I figure maybe if it thinks I'm not out there, it will move around more, and I'll catch it on camera. But all I see are flickers, moments where a sensor light goes on in the distance. Then when I switch the camera to that corridor, nothing is there. Sometimes I stand outside the office door and listen. The building is huge, and I can hear small noises, metal creaking as it cools, water dripping, and sometimes this faint tapping sound. It reminds me of someone lightly drumming their fingers on a pipe. But I can't pinpoint the source. 2 nights ago, I decided to do a thorough search in the early part of my shift. I checked every corridor, every aisle, every corner I could reach. I looked behind every large object. I used my flashlight and even a handheld spotlight the company keeps for emergencies. I found nothing except old junk, spider nests, and dust. At around midnight, I sat in the office to rest. I had a thermos of coffee and I tried to stay calm. The screens showed only the usual stillness. Then, out of nowhere, the motion sensor in corridor C started triggering. The corridor lights there flicked on and off 3 times in quick succession. The monitor for that corridor showed nothing. Just an empty aisle with rows of metal shelves. My neck tensed. I decided to walk over there again. I told myself I might catch it if I moved fast. I held the flashlight tight, stepping carefully. My eyes scanned the shelves. I noticed old stains on the floor. My pulse thumped in my ears. When I reached the spot where the sensor had been tripped, I heard a sharp click. One of the overhead fixtures turned on, then fizzled out, leaving me in partial darkness. I heard breathing again. Slow, rough. It sounded like it was right around the corner from me. I took a few steps forward and saw a shape at the far end of the corridor. It was too dark to see details, but it stood taller than the top shelf. I'm not a short guy. I'm 6 feet tall, and those shelves are about 7 or 8 feet. This figure towered above that height. It had a thin outline, long arms, maybe elongated fingers. I couldn't see its face. My heart felt like it was about to burst. I raised my flashlight. My hand shook so much that the beam bounced around. By the time I stabilized it, the shape was gone. I rushed to the end of the corridor. There was nothing there. No exit, no door, just a concrete wall. I checked behind the shelves. Nobody. I shined my light up at the ceiling, only rafters and cables. I felt a wave of nausea. I had no explanation for how something that big could move so quietly. I stomped around, trying to see if there was some hidden passage or gap in the wall. It was solid concrete. Eventually, I gave up and went back to the office. Now every night I brace myself for the sensors to go wild. Sometimes the presence is in the loading bay. Sometimes it's in corridor C. Sometimes I hear it near the office door, but when I open it, there's no one there. I haven't slept well in weeks. My boss says, as long as nothing's stolen or vandalized, it's not an emergency. But I know something is there. I can feel it watching me. My body tenses whenever I sense that strange pressure in the air. I sit in front of the monitors, and my mind goes on high alert with every small flicker of movement in the cameras. I wait for a face to appear, or a shape to dart through the frame, but all I get are glimpses and fleeting shadows. I keep telling myself maybe I'll catch it on film, and then I can prove I'm not losing my mind. But so far, it's always one step ahead. The nights feel longer now. I check my watch every few minutes. My breaks are quick because I'm scared to linger in any spot for too long. If I use the restroom, I keep the door half open and stay on guard. Every little sound sets me off. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the buzz of the space heater, the crack of distant metal expanding or contracting. I can't shake the feeling that any second, I'll look up and see it in the doorway, staring down at me with those red eyes. I wish I had an explanation. I wish the cameras would stop glitching so I could see what's really out there. I've thought about quitting, but I need the paycheck. so I stay. I spend my shift glued to the monitors, checking each angle, waiting for proof that this thing exists. The hours drag until the early morning light starts to creep through the high windows. That's the only time I breathe a sigh of relief. It's the only time I feel somewhat normal. But the dread never fully goes away. I clock out, walk to my car, and drive home, watching my mirrors to make sure nothing's following me. Then I sleep with the lights on in my bedroom, waiting for the next night, wondering if tonight is the night I finally catch it in plain sight. And if I do, I'm not sure what I'll do next. All I know is, I'm tired of running, but I can't help feeling that if I ever come face to face with it, something in me might snap. Until then, I'll be here, in the dark, watching every flicker on the screen, ready for the next time the sensors go off. I never thought a single plank of wood would turn my workshop into a place that unsettled me, but that's exactly what happened. I'll tell you everything the way it happened, step by step, so you can judge for yourself. I won't hold anything back. It started about 3 months ago, right after I rented this small, worn-down building on the outskirts of town. I'm a carpenter, and I mainly do custom furniture. I usually work with regular wood, nothing fancy. I handle chairs, tables, cabinets, and sometimes a custom shelf or decorative piece. That's it. But then a guy walked in with a piece of wood that changed my whole routine. He showed up on a Tuesday morning. I remember it because my car had a flat tire that day, and I was already annoyed by the time I got to the workshop. The man wore a faded jacket and jeans. He didn't look strange. He just looked like another customer who had found me through a friend or something. But when he pulled that plank from a bag, I noticed it was different. It was old, dark, and covered in odd carvings. They weren't letters that I recognized. They looked more like runes or symbols. I'd never seen anything quite like it. He asked me if I could restore it. He wanted it for decoration in his living room. He said he found it in an antique shop a few towns over. I hesitated because this wasn't my typical work, but I figured a little sanding, maybe some filler, and a few layers of varnish wouldn't hurt. He offered me a decent fee, so I agreed. I took down his contact information and said I'd call him when it was done. When he left, I inspected the plank. It felt dense, heavier than normal wood of that size. My first step was to clean it, so I took a dry rag and tried to wipe off surface dust. The symbols seemed cut into the surface at random angles, but each line looked deliberate. I couldn't read any pattern, though. I decided to just start sanding. I placed the plank on my workbench, attached a sanding disc to my machine, and started with a gentle pass. I noticed the strange pattern of the grains. It looked like rings within rings, but I just assumed it was some rare type of wood. After about 20 minutes, I stopped to check my progress. I'd made a few shallow scratches, but nothing major. I set the plank aside for the day to let any fine dust settle. I locked up and went home feeling normal. The next morning, I opened the workshop, flipped on the lights, and walked over to the bench. I looked at the plank and couldn't believe my eyes. The marks were gone. It looked untouched, as though I hadn't used sandpaper on it. I rubbed my hand across the surface. It felt smooth and unaltered, no scratches or scuffs. I thought maybe I was mixing it up with a different board, but I only had one piece like that. I checked my sanding disc. It showed signs of use. That confirmed I had definitely worked on something, and it had to be that plank. I decided to try again, thinking I must have done something wrong. I sanded for a good half hour. I watched myself wear down some edges, saw dust gathering around the plank, and then I carefully checked it. It showed fresh scratches. I noted them in my mind. I locked up again. The next day I came back and the plank was smooth again. I tried a chemical stripper that I use for removing tough finishes. I brushed it on, waited the recommended time, then wiped it off. The plank looked wet for a while, but after an hour or so it was back to the same dry, dark appearance. No sign of any reaction. I used turpentine, paint thinner, bleach. Nothing affected it. I started feeling uneasy. The workshop felt different. The air seemed heavier, and I noticed random things out of place. I'd leave my hammer on the bench, then I'd return and find it on a shelf across the room. I tried to convince myself I was just being forgetful. Some days I'd feel a chill in the corner near the storage racks. I'd look over and see a flicker of something dark like a shape that moved. But I never caught a clear glimpse. My pulse would race, and I'd feel a knot in my stomach. The place felt wrong. Sometimes I'd wait outside for a moment before going back in just to catch my breath. I tried ignoring it, hoping it was stress. I had a few other orders to fill, some chairs and a small table. I worked on those, leaving the plank for later. But my curiosity got the better of me. I attempted different methods to change the plank. I tried scuffing it with steel wool and a heavy grit paper. I left it soaking in a strong cleaning solvent overnight in a metal tray. Each time I checked, the plank looked the same as when I first saw it. The only difference was that I felt more anxious every time I looked at it. After about a week, I noticed that whenever I was around the plank, my hands would feel unsteady. My chest felt tight. I tried playing music in the shop to distract myself, but it didn't help. One morning I saw a silhouette at the back of the workshop near the supply closet. It was just a brief shape, like a shadow sliding along the wall. I rushed over, turned on more lights, searched the entire place, but I found nothing. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the lighting or my imagination. I kept telling myself to finish the restoration, but the plank wasn't cooperating. No matter what I did, I couldn't alter it. I decided to call the client. I explained that I was having trouble and asked if he had any information on where it came from. He just said the antique shop owner claimed it was old and from somewhere in Northern Europe. He said he still wanted it finished. So I tried a final approach. I prepared a polyurethane varnish, thinking maybe a direct coat could seal it. But every time I brushed on a coat, it would disappear after a few minutes. It didn't drip off, it didn't peel. It just vanished. The wood stayed dry and dull. Eventually, I started feeling weird about being alone in the workshop, especially at night. The shadows felt more pronounced. I was losing sleep, so I rushed to wrap up the job. I sanded the plank one last time and immediately tried to spray a layer of clear lacquer. I saw the lacquer go on, but within an hour the surface was back to normal. I felt a dull ache in my lower back, and the hair on my arms stood up whenever I walked past the plank. The rest of my tools seemed to move around on their own. I'd find screwdrivers on the floor or drill bits in random corners. A few days later, the client showed up without warning. I told him I couldn't do anything more. I said I was sorry, but the plank wouldn't change. He seemed confused. He probably thought I was making excuses. I gave him the plank and told him I wouldn't charge him. He left, and I tried to forget about the whole thing. For a few days, everything was normal again. My workshop felt more comfortable. I finished a pair of custom shelves for a different customer. No strange noises, no tools out of place. I slept better. My back stopped aching. I thought I could move on. But then, about a week after I returned the plank, the same client came back. He held the plank in both hands and looked angry. He accused me of pulling a prank. He said that whenever the plank touched anything metal in his house, it made a faint static sound like a hiss or buzz. He kept insisting I explain how I rigged it. I told him I had no idea what was happening. I asked him to demonstrate. So he picked up a metal ruler from my bench and held it near the plank. I leaned in close and I heard it, a low buzzing like a short burst of static. Hearing that sound made me uneasy. It felt like there was an electrical current running through the wood, but that shouldn't be possible. We tested it a few more times. Each time the ruler or a screwdriver touched the plank, it made that same noise. It wasn't loud, but it was there. He kept asking me what I'd done, but all I could say was that I hadn't done anything. I told him I only tried sanding and varnishing. I explained how it always returned to its original state. He didn't believe me at first, but I pointed out the lack of any visible finish on the wood. There were no signs of varnish or sanding. Finally, he calmed down a bit and seemed to realize I was telling the truth. He asked me if I wanted to try anything else. I said no. I didn't want that thing in my shop anymore. I felt that same tightness in my chest just being near it. I told him to take it somewhere else or just keep it if he really wanted it as a decoration. He said he'd think about it, then left. I've never seen him since. The weird part is, after he left that second time, I noticed my workshop was back to normal again. No shadows, no missing tools, no cold spots. Everything felt quiet. I got back to my usual work. I started a big table project for a local restaurant. I guess the tension drained away once the plank was gone for good. I still have this nagging feeling that it might turn up again, though. Sometimes I'll be working on a new piece and I'll remember that soft buzz. It makes my stomach clench and I have to step outside for a moment. I wish I could offer a scientific explanation, but I can't. I'm just a carpenter, and all I know is how wood usually behaves. That plank didn't behave like wood at all. I tried everything I could to scratch it or cover it, but it refused to change. The only real change came when it reacted to metal and made that hissing sound. I still wonder if it was some chemical property I've never heard of, or if it was something else. The memory sends a chill up my arms. Since then, I decided to avoid taking on unusual restoration jobs. I stick to making furniture from new lumber. I have a stable routine now. I arrive early, cut the wood, sand it down, assemble the pieces, apply finishes, and deliver. Nothing strange has happened since the plank left my workshop, and I don't want to invite more weird situations. I don't talk about it much because most people would just laugh or say I'm making it up, but I know what I saw and how I felt. That's enough to keep me cautious. Sometimes after a long day, I lock up the workshop and stand in the doorway, scanning the dark corners and looking for any sign of a shadow that shouldn't be there. I haven't seen anything. I'm glad, but I'm also a little on edge, like I'm waiting for something to move where it shouldn't. My gut still churns when I remember how the plank fixed itself and refused to hold a finish. It's not normal. I don't care what anyone says. Wood doesn't do that on its own. The client hasn't come back again. Maybe he found someone else willing to examine that thing. Maybe he dumped it somewhere. I hope I never find out. If I see that plank again, I'm going to turn around and walk away. I don't need more of that feeling in my life. The workshop is my livelihood, and I prefer it without unexplained noises or shifting shadows. I'm not a superstitious person, but I have no other explanation for what happened. It was real, and it made my skin crawl. That's the whole story. I guess there's not a big conclusion. I didn't solve anything, and I didn't defeat anything. I just gave it back to the owner and washed my hands of it. If you ever come across a piece of wood with strange symbols that seems to resist all attempts at restoration, maybe you'll remember what I told you. Do whatever you want, but I won't blame you if you leave it alone. My recommendation is to avoid anything that doesn't feel right, especially in a place where you work every day. Tools going missing, shadows where there shouldn't be any, those things can wear you down fast. You can laugh it off if you want, but I know what I went through. That's all I've got to say. I'm just glad it's over. If anyone asks me about that plank, I'll tell them the same thing. I don't want to see it, I don't want to work on it, and I don't want any part of it. My workshop is a normal place now, and I plan to keep it that way. I might buy a security camera at some point just to be safe. But if I'm lucky, I'll never need to watch footage of shadows moving on their own again. This place is mine, and I want it to stay calm. I don't think that's too much to ask. I got the job because nobody else wanted it. My supervisor said it was simple. Show up at odd hours, check the old hospital complex, and make sure nobody was breaking in. The place was under renovation. The pay was decent. I said yes without thinking too much. I had no idea what I was getting into. My first impression of the hospital was that it smelled like stale air and old paint. Some wings had lights that worked, but a lot of the hallways were dark. The building dated back to the 1940s. There were cracked tiles on the floor, faded signs on the walls, and a lot of exposed wiring. The renovation crews left different areas in random states of repair. The entire place felt hollow, with long corridors that echoed every footstep. The guard station was at the front entrance near a small reception counter. I got a portable radio, a flashlight, and a key ring with what felt like 100 old keys. They rattled whenever I walked. Everything about that place felt worn out. On my second week, I heard rumors about Block C. People said something happened there a long time ago, but nobody seemed to know the details. They only said, "Don't stay there too long," with a grin. I figured it was just old gossip or some urban legend. I had no interest in it, but I had to do my rounds there because it was part of the job. The first few nights were quiet. I walked the corridors, flashed my light at closed doors, and scribbled notes on a small pad. The quiet was unnerving, but I assumed I'd get used to it. The weird stuff started around 3 a.m. one night. I stepped into Block C and the corridor was darker than usual. The overhead lights didn't work. The only light came from my flashlight and a few emergency bulbs near the exits. The hallway smelled musty, like damp plaster. Doors lined both sides, each leading to old patient rooms or offices. I remembered locking all those doors the day before, but when I checked them, I saw that every single one was open. That didn't make sense. I always made sure to lock them. My stomach tightened and I felt sweat forming at the back of my neck. I walked down the corridor, peeking into each room. They were empty and dusty. Some had old beds or desks. I heard a faint rattling sound, but I couldn't figure out where it came from. It was like metal scraping on metal, but it stopped whenever I paused to listen. I chose one of the rooms near the far end. I had locked it the night before, so I wanted to see if the door had been forced open. The knob turned easily and the hinges squeaked. Inside, the air felt colder. I stepped in and swept my flashlight across the walls and floor. There was nothing unusual, just some broken equipment and a row of shelves. I heard what sounded like voices whispering, but it was so faint I couldn't make out any words. I stood still. My heart thumped in my ears. I listened for a few seconds, trying to decide if it was just the building settling or maybe the wind. Then it happened again. Whispers, coming from the corner of the room, or maybe the hallway. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I turned to go back into the corridor, but the door was shut. I reached for the knob. It was locked. I fumbled in my pockets for the keys, but I couldn't find them right away. Then the flashlight started flickering. The beam dimmed, came back on, then dimmed again. That unsettled me. I took a deep breath and tried to keep calm. I pressed the button on the flashlight, trying to stop the flickering. It didn't help. I stepped closer to the door, pressed my face to the small glass window, and looked out. The corridor light was weak, but I saw a figure at the far end. It looked like a man in a long coat, maybe a doctor's coat. It had dark stains on it. He stood there, not moving. I felt my pulse race. My throat went dry. I wondered if he was real, or if my eyes were playing tricks. I shouted, "Hey, do you need help?" My voice cracked. He turned his head slowly and looked in my direction. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the outline of his head. After a few seconds, he walked around the corner and disappeared. I tried the door again, rattling it with my free hand. It wouldn't budge. I finally found the right key, or at least I thought I did. I inserted it, twisted, and heard a click. The door opened like nothing was wrong. I rushed into the corridor, pointing my flashlight in every direction. It was empty. No footsteps, no sounds, no movement. My scalp tingled. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I walked to the corner where I saw him turn. It led to a small intersection of hallways. Each passage was pitch black, except for the faint exit sign above a door at the end of one corridor. There was no sign of anyone. I checked all the doors in that area. They were locked. Some had boards across them, and others looked sealed from the inside. No footprints, no scuff marks. I just stood there, breathing heavily, thinking I might be going crazy. The next day, I mentioned it to a coworker. He shrugged and said weird things happened in Block C all the time. He said people saw shapes or heard voices. Some had seen shadows moving along the walls. Nobody stayed longer than they had to. I asked him if he had ever seen a man in a stained coat. He said no. Then he changed the subject. He acted like he didn't want to talk about it. I felt unsettled, but I didn't push him. I had a job to do. I couldn't let my imagination get the best of me. Almost every night, something else happened. One evening, I walked through a corridor and found the lights flickering on and off in a steady rhythm. The switches were on the wall, but nobody was around. Another time, I heard a gurney rolling behind me. When I turned, there was nothing but an empty hallway. Sometimes I smelled rubbing alcohol or old disinfectant in places that were locked up and had been empty for years. I felt a constant unease in Block C, like the air was heavier. I couldn't explain it. One night around 3 a.m., I decided to spend my entire shift focusing on Block C. I wanted answers. I walked every floor, checked every door, and tried to document each odd sound. The building was silent except for dripping water from a leaky pipe. I climbed the stairs to the second level of Block C and found a storage area full of old medical files and dusty cabinets. I poked around, shining my flashlight into dark corners. I noticed a strange draft behind one cabinet. It felt like cold air. I moved the cabinet aside and discovered a locked door. It had no label. I jiggled the knob. It was stuck. I flipped through my keys until I found one that fit. It turned easily. Behind the door, I found a small room with no windows. There was a single table in the center and some shelves along the walls. The shelves held old glass jars and metal trays. They were all empty, but I saw some residue that might have been chemicals or dried fluids. The floor had deep scratches, like something heavy was dragged across it. The air smelled stale and bitter. I thought about leaving, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I stepped inside and suddenly the door slammed shut behind me. My flashlight flickered. I felt a rush of panic. My instincts kicked in, and I grabbed the knob, turning it quickly. It opened on the first try. I looked out into the storage area, shining my flashlight in every direction. Nobody was there. My hands trembled. I had trouble catching my breath. I closed that hidden room's door again, making sure it was secure. I shoved the cabinet back against it. I felt an urge to leave Block C immediately. I hurried down the stairs and back into the main hall. My skin was clammy, and my heart was still racing. I told myself that maybe I'd caused a draft. Maybe the door was on a hinge that swung shut, but part of me doubted that explanation. I had felt a presence in that room. I couldn't deny it. Over the next few nights, I started feeling more tired. My sleep during the day was restless. My dreams were full of dark corridors and whispering voices. I tried to brush it off. I still needed the paycheck. But every time I entered Block C, I had this persistent dread. The building felt alive in a quiet, unsettling way. Rooms that were locked would be open the next time I checked. Lights that were working would suddenly burn out when I walked by. Doors would close on their own, but only when I was alone. One time, I sat in a small break area near the entrance to Block C. The area had a few chairs and a vending machine that still worked. While I drank some coffee, I heard footsteps coming from the corridor behind me. They were slow and deliberate. I stood up, turned around, and shone my flashlight. I expected to see a worker or maybe a trespasser. There was nobody there, but the footsteps continued, passing close by, then fading away. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Sometimes I tried to call out on the radio, but it didn't help. Nobody else wanted to come near Block C. One coworker told me over the radio to keep a safe distance and just log any unusual activity. He laughed nervously when he said it, as if he knew there was more going on. I started wondering if the place was playing tricks on me or if I was losing touch with reality. My nights blended together. The tension never let up. Another night, I was in the main corridor of Block C, checking the doors on each side. I heard a loud thump from one of the rooms. It sounded like something heavy hitting the floor. I rushed in, thinking maybe a piece of debris fell or a cabinet tipped over. I found a desk drawer pulled out and scattered papers on the ground. The desk was dusty, and the papers looked ancient. The top page had some handwritten notes about patient treatments. The date was from 1948. I bent down to pick up a page. It had some doctor's notes on a procedure, but I didn't see any mention of a patient's death or anything like that. I felt uneasy reading it, like I was intruding on something private. I put the papers back and searched the room. Nothing else seemed out of place. The desk drawer looked intact. There was no reason for it to jump open like that. I left it as I found it and stepped back into the corridor. By then, my nerves were shot. My back ached from tension. My mind was in a constant state of alert. Every sound made me jump. When I approached the old nurse's station, I saw a faint glow behind the counter. It was soft, almost like a flashlight hidden behind something. I walked over, shining my own light across the station. There was no lantern or lamp. There was no one crouched there. Yet the glow lingered for a few seconds, then disappeared. I felt a wave of dizziness. I leaned against the counter and tried to catch my breath. I kept going, forcing myself to finish my round. I tried to keep track of the time, hoping the shift would end soon. The building felt heavier than ever. I felt like I was trespassing in a space that wanted me out. When I reached the double doors at the far end, they were locked. I knew I had left them unlocked earlier. I inserted the key, but the lock wouldn't turn. My frustration boiled over. I kicked the door in anger. The lock suddenly gave way, and the door swung open. I had trouble steadying my breathing. That was the pattern. I'd find locked doors that I knew I'd left open, or open doors I knew I'd locked. I'd hear voices where no one was standing. I'd see shapes at the edge of my vision. Sometimes I caught sight of that man in the stained coat at the end of a hallway or disappearing around a corner. Each time he never spoke. He never approached me. He just stood there, or walked away, leaving me with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. After almost every shift, I reported these incidents. Management told me I was probably overtired, or maybe it was just other workers coming in at strange hours. They said they'd look into it. They never did. The incidents continued. Block C felt alive with memories that refused to stay quiet. The walls seemed to hold on to old sounds. The floors carried old impressions that surfaced at night. No matter how many times I tried to sweep it away with logic, the place kept showing me things. I never saw any actual harm come to anyone. I never saw blood or anything like that. It was always locked doors, missing keys, or phantom footsteps. But those events were enough to keep my nerves on edge. After a while, I learned to expect them. I started checking the corridor behind me every few steps. I kept my flashlight close and my keys in my front pocket, where I could grab them fast. I walked with a knot in my gut, like I was bracing for the next thing. One night near the end of my shift, I stood in the main lobby and looked at the entrance to Block C. The corridor stretched out, dimly lit by a few old bulbs. I could feel that constant pull, like the building had eyes. I decided not to go back in that night. I had done my rounds and I had no reason to push my luck. As I stood there, though, the overhead light flickered, and I heard a distant rattling sound from Block C. It echoed for a moment, then stopped. I felt a chill in my arms and neck. It was the same feeling I got every time something unexplainable happened in that place. I ended my shift, left the building, and drove home. My mind replayed the sightings, the locked doors, the voices. I tried to shake it off, but it stuck with me. Every new shift brought more of the same. The corridor doors never stayed the way I left them. That man in the coat appeared and disappeared at random. Sometimes there were hushed conversations echoing through empty rooms. I never found a clear explanation, and I eventually stopped trying to find one. I just focused on not panicking while I did my job. I still work there. The renovation continues at a slow pace. Every now and then I see new workers show up. They last a few days in Block C, then ask to be reassigned. I can't blame them. The place doesn't welcome outsiders. It carries old echoes that don't want to rest. I keep a tight grip on my keys and I make sure my flashlight has fresh batteries. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I know something in that building isn't normal. I stand guard at night, and the walls seem to watch me back. That's my story. The old hospital has memories. They aren't quiet, and they aren't friendly. I don't know what happened in that wing years ago, and at this point, I'm not sure I want to know. I just do my rounds and hope I don't run into that figure with the stained coat. I can feel he's still there, waiting in the corridors, locked behind doors that don't stay locked for long. Block C never lets you forget it's alive in its own way. When I turn off the lights and step inside, I hear it. It's a whisper, A noise, a cold gust of air, or a shadow in the corner of my eye. And it keeps happening almost every single night. I never thought I'd feel genuine fear behind a convenience store counter, but that night proved me wrong. I'd had my share of odd customers. I'd witnessed drunk guys stumbling in at 3 in the morning and folks trying to shoplift candy bars, but I never felt truly threatened until those 2 men walked in. It happened well past midnight, sometime around 2 in the morning, when my eyes were heavy and my patience was thin. The store was quiet, and I was alone in there. That was normal, though. My manager rarely scheduled anyone else for the overnight shift, and I'd gotten used to it. But this time, it felt different the moment they stepped inside. I was standing behind the counter, leaning forward with my elbows pressed on the surface. I remember the humming of the fluorescent lights overhead, that low buzz that usually fades into the background. That night, it seemed louder. My stomach was tense, and I noticed the chill from the air conditioner. I had the security monitors turned on as always, but the camera angles in that store never gave me full peace of mind. They left blind spots. When those 2 men came in, each wearing dark jackets and matching baseball caps, I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling that hit me right away. I watched them from my spot, trying not to stare, but I also wanted to keep track of their movements. They lingered near the shelves of energy drinks at first, just out of earshot. The older guy looked maybe in his late 30s, had a bit of a stubbly beard under the cap. The younger one looked like he was in his mid-20s, taller, leaner, maybe a bit more restless. Both had the same dark clothes and the same way of glancing around. They would pick up random cans, set them down, then glance over at me. I tried to act normal. I grabbed a rag and started wiping the counter, just to look busy. My heart rate started climbing. I tried to convince myself it was just the overnight paranoia, the kind that comes from watching too many true crime shows. But I couldn't shake the heavy sensation in my gut. Something was off. The store was empty, and the gas pumps outside were quiet. Usually, we'd get truckers or late-night travelers stopping in for coffee or to use the restroom. But at that moment, there was nobody else. The silence was overwhelming. The older man finally picked up a can of soda. He turned and walked toward me, but he did it in a slow, calculated way. His eyes stayed on me the whole time. I forced a smile, though my face felt stiff. He placed the soda on the counter and then asked me if we carried some weird brand of cigarettes I'd never heard of. I explained that we only had the usual brands behind me, but I'd never stocked what he was describing. He leaned closer, still staring. It was so intense that I felt my hands getting clammy. I wiped them on my pants under the counter, hoping he wouldn't notice. The younger guy hovered near the aisle that had chips and jerky. At first, I thought he was just looking for something to eat, but then he drifted over to the shelf next to the register. It was one of those rotating displays with lighters and cheap phone chargers. He was close enough that I could see his lips tighten. He was scanning the area, flicking his eyes over the candy bars, the scratch-off lottery tickets, and probably the register itself. Then he bumped my arm on purpose, like he was trying to get a reaction. I felt my breath catch for a second. It was such a minor physical contact, but it felt like a test. I wanted to tell him to back off, but I was alone, and the guy next to me also looked ready for something. The tension was so thick that my hands started trembling. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the beep of the register, but I couldn't stop glancing between them and the door. I heard a faint rumble of an engine outside, but it was distant enough that it didn't really register in my mind. I was more concerned about the men. The older one started questioning me about random products we don't carry, like off-brand beer or some special chewing tobacco. Each time I answered, my voice sounded unsteady in my own ears. I noticed the younger guy looking at me with a kind of smirk, like he knew I was nervous. My pulse was pounding, and I could feel the sweat forming under my shirt. The artificial breeze from the air conditioner was cold against my damp skin. Then things shifted. A loud, sudden rev of an engine came from the gas station lot. It sounded like maybe a truck or a motorcycle, something powerful with a deep roar. Both men snapped their heads toward the entrance. It startled me too. The older one grabbed the can off the counter, glanced at the younger man, and then started moving toward the door. I didn't know what was going on, but they seemed spooked. I saw them hesitate, look at each other, and then walk out in a rush. I felt a surge of relief, but I also knew I needed to act. My gut told me these guys were about to do something. Maybe they were just trying to scare me, or maybe they had bigger plans. Either way, they hadn't paid for anything, and that older guy still had the unopened soda can in his hand. Normally, I'd call out to remind them to pay, but the situation was too strange. My fight or flight kicked in. I rushed to the door as soon as they were outside, and I locked it from inside. Our doors were mostly glass, but there was a reinforced metal frame that I could secure. Once I heard the click of the lock, I took a breath and looked around. I grabbed the phone behind the counter and dialed my manager. We had a direct line that would ring her phone even after hours. I explained in a shaky voice what was happening. 2 men acting strange, possibly about to rob the place. She told me to stay calm and stay on the line while she contacted security. My hand was gripping the phone so hard it hurt. I walked toward the window to see what was going on outside. When I peered through the glass, I didn't see them. They were just gone. The engine noise was still there, but I couldn't spot the source. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere near the pumps, but I couldn't see much detail. I scanned every corner of that parking lot, from the dimly lit air pump station to the dark edges near the dumpsters. Nothing. The place was empty except for a few parked cars that belonged to people who worked at the 24-hour diner next door. I told my manager on the phone that they had disappeared, and she told me to wait inside with the doors locked just to be safe. She was on her way, but it would take at least 20 minutes for her to get there. I started to calm down, thinking maybe those guys got spooked by the noise and decided to leave. That's when I noticed something on the counter. A screwdriver. It wasn't one of ours. It was big, with a plastic red handle, and it looked worn, like it had seen a lot of use. I froze for a second, trying to piece it together. Nobody else had come in that night, so it had to belong to one of the men. My stomach dropped. It felt like proof they were planning something. They must have set it down on the counter at some point, or maybe they had it tucked in a pocket and dropped it when they heard that engine. Either way, the fact that they left a screwdriver on the counter made me feel sick. It looked like a tool, but it could have been a weapon in the wrong hands. That realization sent a shiver through my entire body. My fingers tingled and I could feel the blood rush to my face. I told my manager about it, and she told me again to stay calm. She asked if there were any cameras pointed at the counter where they might have left it. I looked at the monitor, scanning each camera feed. There was one that showed part of the area near the register, but it was angled in such a way that you could only see the top of the counter. The men's faces were mostly out of frame. It wasn't great evidence, but it was something. My heart was still racing, and every tiny noise made me jump. The whir of the refrigerator in the back, the humming lights, the soft beep from the register when I pressed any buttons. Everything sounded louder. I kept pacing behind the counter, checking the doors and windows to make sure they hadn't come back. Each time a car passed by on the road outside, my body tensed, expecting them to return. But no one else came inside. Finally, after what felt like forever, my manager arrived. She's a straightforward person, tall and no nonsense, and she walked in with her phone in hand. She'd been on a call with the store's security team, explaining what happened. She looked at me, took in my expression, and nodded like she understood exactly how freaked out I was. We both stood behind the counter, staring at that screwdriver. She told me she'd watch the footage and then report it to the local cops. If these guys tried anything else in the area, at least there'd be a record of their visit. She stayed with me until my shift ended at 6 a.m. I was grateful for the company, but I never fully relaxed the rest of that night. Every time the automatic door slid open, I braced myself. Every car that parked at the pump made my chest tighten. I caught myself holding my breath a few times, only exhaling when I saw it was just a tired traveler, or someone stumbling in for cigarettes. My manager watched me with a sympathetic look. She told me to let her know if I wanted to go home early, but I stuck it out. I didn't want to let fear push me out of my job. Still, It was a rough few hours. The cops eventually showed up just before dawn. 2 officers came in, asked some questions, took a quick look at the video footage. They weren't exactly sure what to make of it. The camera quality was poor, and the angle didn't show the men's faces clearly. But the officers saw enough to confirm that 2 men in dark jackets had come inside around 2:15 a.m., lingered around suspiciously, and then left. One of them did seem to place something on the counter. The cops took the screwdriver with them as evidence and said they'd keep an eye out. I didn't have much more to tell them. I just recounted the moment the engine revved outside and how the men seemed startled. The officers nodded, asked if I felt I was in immediate danger now, and when I said no, they left to file their report. Once my shift ended, I drove home with this weird mix of relief and lingering tension. My legs felt shaky, and I could still feel my palms sweating on the steering wheel. Even though the sun was coming up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had almost happened. It was like being on the edge of a cliff without realizing it until I looked down. My manager told me to take the next night off if I wanted, but I didn't. I needed the hours, and I didn't want to spend the evening alone in my apartment with my thoughts spinning. When I came back the following night, I felt a knot in my stomach the moment I walked in. I checked the shelves where the men had been browsing. Everything was normal, but I imagined them standing there, staring me down, testing me. I looked behind the counter where the screwdriver had been left. The surface was spotless, but I remembered how it felt to see that tool lying there. That chill in my spine wouldn't go away. Over time, I became more cautious. I started checking the parking lot more often, stepping outside to see if anyone was loitering. I'd keep the doors locked whenever the store was empty, only opening them if a customer approached. My manager didn't mind, especially after hearing my story. It wasn't foolproof, but it gave me some sense of control. I even carried a small flashlight in my back pocket, just to have something in my hand if I needed it. I never saw those men again. They didn't come back, and I never heard of a robbery or assault that matched their description. Sometimes I wonder if they were just sizing me up and changed their minds. Maybe they were planning to rob the place but got spooked by that engine revving outside. Whatever their intention, I'm convinced it wasn't good. The look in their eyes told me enough. The younger guy's smirk, the older guy's intense stare, the screwdriver left behind. It all pointed to something bad. I'm glad they decided to walk away because I'm not sure I would have made it out unscathed if they'd gone through with whatever they were planning. Now, whenever I talk about that night, I keep it simple. There's no deep lesson or moral to it. It's just a straight fact. I was lucky. Lucky that the noise outside distracted them at the right moment. Lucky that I locked the door and called my manager before they could come back. Lucky that I didn't freeze when it mattered. That's all there is to it. I still take the night shift sometimes, but I'm always on edge, scanning every face, every movement, every hand that disappears into a pocket. My nerves haven't been the same since. That's the story. No sugarcoating. I was there, and it felt like one wrong move would have changed everything. And that's not something I forget easily. I always hated the moment right after everyone else left. The lights would switch off in half the corridors and the sounds of machinery winding down echoed through the empty space. There's a tightness in my chest as soon as I see the last person clock out. But my job demands that I stay behind, check the systems, and make sure everything is shut down the right way. I'm the production supervisor, and lately, management has been strict about cutting energy costs. That means fewer lights at night, fewer fans, and fewer comforts for anyone stuck in the building after hours. That person is me. I have a small flashlight, but the building's corridors are so long and winding that the beam just disappears into the distance. The ceilings are tall and the windows are narrow, so there's hardly any natural light coming in from outside. We're in an industrial area, so streetlights are sparse. Inside, the place looks like a giant concrete maze with metal staircases, aluminum railings, and heavy doors. The air feels stale once most equipment is off, and the temperature drops by a few degrees after midnight. My footsteps sound hollow, and sometimes I can't tell if the echo is from me or something else. My shift usually ends around 6 p.m., but I stick around until everything is secured. Most nights I'm out by 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. That's when the weird noises start. I'm not a superstitious person. I'm a mechanical guy used to diagnosing rattles, vibrations, and faulty wiring. But over the last few weeks, something has changed. I keep hearing what sounds like footsteps on the floor above me when I know no one is there. The place empties out by 7 p.m. at the latest, and I have the log of who comes and goes. Yet these footsteps keep popping up, sometimes faint, sometimes heavy. One Tuesday, I had finished checking the assembly line area and was on my way to the break room. I heard a clang on the metal staircase that leads to the top floor. It was a distinctive squeak that only happens when weight is put on a certain step. The step is a bit loose, and whenever someone goes down, there's a creak like metal bending under pressure. That night, I heard it loud and clear, as though someone was hurrying down in boots. The sound echoed for a few seconds, then stopped. I walked over and aimed my flashlight at the steps. Nothing. I climbed up expecting to see a coworker or maybe a security guard who forgot to sign out. The staircase was empty. I felt a sudden chill run from my neck to my arms. My hands started sweating. I checked each landing. No one was there. I didn't want to dwell on it, so I wrote it off as my mind playing tricks. I finished the rest of my rounds, locked the doors, and left. The next day I went to check the camera feed for that staircase because it's part of my weekly safety review. When I played back the footage from that time, there was a burst of static right when I heard the steps. The camera had a glitch for a few seconds. Then it resumed. The hallway appeared empty in the frames before and after the static. I felt uneasy. That camera doesn't malfunction often. Usually when it does, we see it in the system log, and it's reported to the maintenance team. I didn't see any such report. A week later, I stayed late again. Nothing happened until about 8:30 p.m. I was in the packaging area checking on some newly installed machines. I stepped out into the corridor and headed for the shipping dock. The overhead lights were dim because of the energy-saving policy. I could see only a fraction of what I used to see. The beams along the ceiling seemed to fade into blackness. I heard a low thump that came from somewhere behind me. It was soft, but it cut through the silence like a pulse. Then I heard footsteps. They sounded like they were coming from the second floor again. I tried to ignore them and kept walking to the shipping dock. When I got there, I started shutting down the overhead crane controls. We only use them during peak hours. After I flipped a couple of switches, the place went quieter than usual. I heard a loud metallic scrape from the other side of the dock doors. My skin tingled. The air felt heavier. I glanced at my phone to check the time. It was 8:47 p.m. I remember that detail because everything about that moment felt off. I left the crane control panel and walked back into the corridor. It was dark, and the corridor lights were flickering a bit due to the old fixtures. I heard nothing for a few seconds, just the gentle hum of some machines in standby mode. As I walked back toward the main area, I passed by the metal staircase. I felt a chill again, this time more intense. It was like cold air wrapped around my chest and squeezed. I froze in place. My flashlight was pointed at the lower steps, and I could see the dull shine of the metal. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck, the kind of feeling you get when someone is right behind you. Then I heard it. 2 footsteps on the staircase, clang, clang. I spun around, aiming my flashlight. There was no one. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there, muscles tensed, ready to see a figure. But the steps were empty. I forced myself to keep moving. I checked the last few machines, did a final walkthrough of the assembly line, and then returned to my office to lock up. When I got there, I decided to take a look at the cameras again. I pulled up the feed for the staircase along with the other critical areas. The timestamp was about the same moment I heard the clang, but the video looked scrambled. Horizontal lines flickered across the screen. After about 5 seconds of interference, the camera returned to normal. No sign of anyone in the footage. I sat there, feeling my heart pounding. My palms were sweating, and my breathing was shallow. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I checked other cameras. Everything else was normal. I decided to go back to the staircase and look around. The corridors were quiet, and the echo of my own footsteps felt unnerving. When I reached the staircase, I felt another wave of cold. My flashlight beam wavered because my hand was shaking. At the top of the stairs, I saw something that made me freeze. There was a man-shaped silhouette. It was dark, standing still. I couldn't see a face. There was no detail, just the outline of a person. My stomach twisted. My throat felt dry and I couldn't bring myself to speak. Then the figure vanished in an instant. One blink, and it was gone. I couldn't tell if it moved away or just dissolved into the darkness. My hands felt weak, like I might drop my flashlight. My legs tensed and a surge of adrenaline pumped through me. I forced myself to climb the stairs, checking each step. At the top, there was nothing except a metal door that leads to the storage loft. I tried the door, but it was locked. I swung the flashlight beam across the narrow hallway. Empty. My breath sounded loud in my ears. I left the building a few minutes later, not bothering to do any extra checks. I felt scared, and I didn't like it. I drove home with my mind racing. That night I couldn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silhouette. I felt that cold tension in my chest. At work the next day, I wanted to talk to someone about it, but I didn't. I didn't want people thinking I was losing my mind. The boss only cares about budgets and deadlines. He doesn't care about strange noises. Over the next week, I tried to keep my mind off what I saw. I focused on my normal duties, but each night, I had to walk past that staircase. Sometimes I heard nothing. Other times I heard echoes of steps above me. Twice, I heard the metal squeak as if someone was moving on it. I kept checking the cameras, and each time I heard the noises, the feed showed interference. I showed the security footage to the IT guy, hoping he could explain the glitches. He just shrugged and said something about old wiring or electromagnetic interference from the machinery. He didn't seem concerned. I didn't press it. One evening, around 7:50 p.m., I had a heavy workload. There was a new shipment of materials, and the forklift operators left the pallets in the loading area for me to check. By the time I finished, it was almost 9 p.m. I walked through the corridors, shutting off lights and fans. I got to the big bay door and locked it. Then I walked toward the staircase side of the building to reach my office. I was tired, and my back ached. The corridor looked darker than usual. The sensors sometimes don't detect me until I'm halfway in, so I was basically navigating by flashlight. As I approached the staircase, I heard a single step. It sounded like someone putting weight on the top stair. My stomach tightened. I swung the flashlight up, and there he was again. That silhouette, the same shape, like a tall man standing perfectly still. No face, no features, just an outline. I whispered, "Hey," without thinking. I don't know what I expected. It didn't respond. It vanished again. This time I felt something like a static charge in the air. The hair on my arm stood up. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. I gripped my flashlight so hard my knuckles hurt. I tried to see if there was anywhere a real person could hide. The top floor door was locked with a key code. Nobody else had the code except me and a few managers, and they were all gone. I walked up the steps. My legs felt heavy. Each step creaked under my feet. I reached the top, and the door was still locked. The keypad's red light glowed. Everything looked normal. I stayed there for a moment, catching my breath and trying to calm down. My body felt tense, like I was in a threat situation. I kept looking around, but I saw no movement. The overhead lights were dim, and the corridors up there were mostly dark. I pointed the flashlight into the gloom. Empty. I headed back down. I locked up the building and left. The next morning I walked in like nothing was wrong. Part of me wanted to march into the boss's office and say I refused to work late anymore. But I need this job. So I kept quiet. When evening came, I dreaded the final rounds. I checked the clock. It was 7:15 p.m. People were packing up. I stayed at my desk a bit longer, hoping someone else might also stay. No luck. By 7:45 p.m., I was alone again. The corridors felt endless and silent. I kept telling myself that I was just tired or paranoid. When I finished my routine, I approached that staircase with caution. My mouth felt dry. I had a dull headache. My eyes kept flicking to the top landing. The overhead light flickered a bit, making shadows dance on the walls. I heard soft footsteps again, but they seemed farther away. I braced myself, took a step onto the stairs, and listened. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaky. The steps ahead of me looked normal. I climbed up, checked the door, and climbed back down. Nothing happened. I felt a hint of relief, but the tension never fully left my body. I reached the bottom floor and walked away, heading toward the main exit. Then I heard the footsteps behind me. 3, maybe 4 steps on the metal. I stopped, turned around, and the sound stopped. My skin crawled. I realized I was gripping my flashlight so hard that my hand hurt. I hurried out of the building, locked the doors, and basically ran to my car. During the drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, feeling jumpy. Now, every time I walk by that staircase, I expect to hear something. Often I do. A faint echo or a metallic creak that doesn't match my own steps. Sometimes I see that silhouette at the top and it vanishes in an instant. My mind goes blank for a moment and my chest tightens. I still do my job. I check the machines and follow the shutdown procedures. I write my reports and keep my head down. But I can't shake the feeling that the building isn't really empty when I'm there. The silhouette is always near the stairs. The cameras still glitch at random times. The footsteps echo in the dark, and I haven't found a single explanation. I don't tell my coworkers about it anymore. A few times I hinted at strange noises, but they brushed it off. They said the old place has weird acoustics and that I'm just tired. I tried to let it go, but I can't ignore what I see and hear. It's real to me in those moments. It's right there in front of me, and I can't explain it. Every time I step close to that staircase, I feel an icy sensation in my chest. My breathing goes shallow and my heart speeds up. I always think I might see that outline again. Sometimes I do, and I freeze for a second. I've learned to keep walking. I finish my duties, gather my stuff, and leave as fast as I can. I don't know if it's something supernatural or a trick of my eyes. I'm not interested in theories right now. All I know is that I stand in that giant labyrinth of a building with almost no lights on. The floors and metal beams echo around me, and I keep hearing those damn footsteps. The building feels cold and empty, but I'm convinced someone or something is there. It stands at the top of the staircase watching. I feel it even when I don't see it. I keep hoping that someday I'll walk by and hear nothing, see nothing, and feel normal again. But so far, that hasn't happened. I'm stuck with these nighttime rounds, and I have to pass that staircase whether I like it or not. And every single time I hear those steps or see that shape, I don't know what else to do. So I keep going, keep locking up, keep saving energy for the company. But inside I'm on edge, waiting for the next echo of metal under invisible feet. I'll never forget the night I first saw that blinding light above the field. I was on a work trip, alone in my car, about to take the same old back road I always dreaded. It was dark, the road was in bad shape, and I was already tired. But the moment I saw that light, everything else seemed irrelevant. My heart pounded, my hands tightened on the steering wheel, and my stomach flipped. I want to tell you how it all happened, step by step, without fancy descriptions or poetic language. This is exactly what I experienced, and I still think about it every month when I have to drive out there again. My job forces me to travel to different small towns, checking on local suppliers. Most people take the main highways, but my schedule is always tight, and I've got to cut time wherever I can. So I end up taking these secondary roads through farmland. They're long, bumpy, and usually lined by fields of corn on each side. During the day, it's just a slow drive with a decent view. At night, it turns into a chore. The only real light out there comes from my headlights and the small reflectors on the road posts. There's not much else. Maybe an occasional distant farmhouse light, but that's about it. Still, it's my usual route, and I know every twist and turn. I'd heard stories about one particular stretch of road. Locals sometimes call it the weird highway or something like that. They say people see lights or shapes they can't explain. Some talk about strange aircraft. Others mention hearing odd sounds echoing through the fields. I never gave it much thought. I always chalked those stories up to local legends, or maybe people exaggerating after a long day. Then came that spring night. I remember it was a Tuesday in April. The air felt a bit humid. I had the car windows cracked open to keep me awake. My radio was off because I needed to focus on the road. I was maybe 20 miles from my destination, and the clock on my dashboard showed it was almost 11 p.m. I could see the outline of the cornfields in my peripheral vision, tall stalks stretching into the darkness. There was no moon that night, or if there was, it was hidden behind thick clouds. I was approaching a gentle curve when I noticed a bright glow. At first, I thought it was a tractor's floodlight on the other side of the corn. Sometimes farmers work late or leave big lights on their fields, but this looked different. It was too white and too focused to be a regular field lamp. I slowed down a bit, letting my car roll along at maybe 25 miles per hour. The glow was off to my right side, above the field, maybe 200 meters away. It wasn't moving, which made it even more noticeable. It just sat there, like a glowing orb suspended in midair. I felt a sudden rush of adrenaline. My stomach got tight, and a cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I remember glancing at my rearview mirror to see if anyone was behind me, but the road was empty. I took a deep breath, tried to stay calm, and decided to pull over to see if I could figure out what I was looking at. I didn't want to keep driving with that thing hovering nearby, not knowing if it was a drone or something else. I parked on the shoulder and turned off the engine. The headlights stayed on, casting a dim glow on the edge of the road. I rolled down my window all the way and leaned out, resting my arm on the sill. I could hear the wind rustling the corn stalks. No other sounds. No engine noise from my car, no insects chirping, just the wind. And that light was still there, shining bright enough to hurt my eyes if I stared directly at it for too long. I tried to see if there was any structure around it. A tower, a pole, anything. But there was nothing. It just hung in the air, perfectly still. It felt like a spotlight, but I couldn't see a beam pointing downward. I also couldn't see a source above it. It was just a bright mass of light, maybe the size of a large car. It didn't flicker. It didn't blink. It was just steady and quiet. The quietness got to me. Usually, if there's a helicopter or a plane, you hear something. But I heard nothing. My heart thumped so hard that I felt each beat in my ears. After maybe 20 seconds, the light made a sudden move. It shot to the left in a perfectly straight line, covering what looked like a huge distance in the blink of an eye. It stopped abruptly, with no deceleration, no arc. My jaw dropped. I sat there trying to breathe, but it felt like my lungs were stuck. Then it moved up, slowly, maybe a few meters. Then it stayed still again, all in absolute silence. No hum, no vibration in the air. Nothing. I started thinking I was hallucinating or seeing some reflection. I checked my side mirror and then looked away for a moment, focusing on my hands on the steering wheel. They were trembling. I told myself to calm down, that it might be some advanced drone. But the speed and the absence of sound seemed impossible to me. Suddenly, the light vanished. It didn't dim or move away. It was there, and then it wasn't. The field looked the same as always, just dark, with faint shapes of cornstalks bending in the wind. I felt a jolt in my chest, like my body was expecting some loud noise or flash, but there was nothing. My car's engine was off, so I sat there listening to my own breathing. It sounded loud in my ears. After a few seconds, I turned the ignition and started the car again. My hand was shaking as I gripped the gear shift. I wanted to get out of there. I didn't bother checking the sky again. I was too nervous. I just wanted to drive. My foot slipped on the gas pedal and I lurched forward onto the road. I picked up speed, probably faster than I should have, but I needed to put distance between me and that spot. The rest of the drive was a blur. I kept looking at my mirrors, half expecting that light to show up behind me. My mind was racing with questions. What the hell was that? Could it have been a drone? But drones make noise, and they don't move like that. Planes or helicopters are always audible. Military craft? That was the only other thought I had, but we don't have any bases nearby, not that I know of. And even so, I've never seen or heard of something moving with that kind of instantaneous acceleration. I reached my motel in the next town. My shirt was soaked under my arms. I walked to the reception desk and tried to act normal. I checked in, grabbed my key, and headed to my room. As soon as I got inside, I locked the door and double-checked the latch. I felt jumpy, like at any second the room lights would flicker and reveal something outside the window. But nothing happened. I dropped onto the bed, still in my clothes, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that light again. I replayed the moment it shot across the sky in my head, over and over. I wondered if I should tell anyone. Part of me worried people would think I was making it up. The other part of me wanted to call someone immediately. Around 2 a.m., I finally dozed off. The next morning, I dragged myself to the work site. I tried to focus on the usual tasks, checking inventory, speaking with the local manager, inspecting quality. My mind wasn't in the game. My boss noticed I was distracted when he called me for a status update. I mumbled something about a stressful drive. I didn't give details. Later that afternoon, I went to grab lunch at a small diner. I sat at the counter and ended up chatting with an older guy sitting 2 stools away. He lived in the area and mentioned he'd been around these parts for decades. We talked about the usual stuff, the weather, the cost of living, whatever. Then I worked up the nerve to ask him, "Hey, do you ever see weird lights around these back roads at night?" He turned to me and let out a small laugh. "Oh, that? Yeah, you're not the first person to ask. I've seen some strange things. Some folks blame it on experimental aircraft. Others say it's something else." We didn't go into detail, but that small exchange gave me a bit of relief. I wasn't completely alone in this. Later that day, I spoke to another local business contact. I casually brought up the same topic, and he gave me a serious look. He nodded and said, "I've seen lights move across those cornfields. Doesn't look or sound like normal aircraft." He didn't seem excited or scared. He just accepted it like it was another odd fact of life around there. That night, I avoided that particular stretch of road by taking a longer route. It added an extra hour to my trip, and the highways were still dark and lined with similar fields, but I didn't care. I couldn't bring myself to pass by the exact spot where I'd seen the light. I felt a tightness in my chest just imagining it. Eventually, I reached home. I poured myself a stiff drink, sat on my couch, and tried to make sense of it all. But I couldn't. In the following weeks, I kept thinking about possible explanations. Drones, weather balloons, atmospheric illusions. None of it seemed to match what I saw. The movement was too fast, the abrupt stops were too perfect, and the total silence made my spine tingle just thinking about it. My wife noticed I was on edge, but I didn't share the whole story with her. I just said I had a weird experience out on the road. She shrugged and said, "If it was that scary, just take another route next time." Easy for her to say, but not exactly practical. Those roads are part of my job. I can't always take a long detour. Eventually, a new month rolled around and I had to head back to the same region. I found myself glued to the weather forecast, hoping for a storm that would give me an excuse to cancel or postpone the trip. But the weather was clear. So on a Wednesday evening, I packed up my car and started driving. My nerves were shot. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My eyes kept flicking to the sky, scanning for any sign of a glow. Every few minutes, I'd lean forward to peer through the windshield, half expecting a flash. When I reached that infamous stretch, I felt my pulse spike. My forehead was damp with sweat. I slowed down to a crawl, even though the road was empty. My headlights illuminated the asphalt and the nearby road signs. I glanced at the fields on my right and left. The cornstalks swayed in the night breeze. I rolled down my window and listened. Nothing but wind, no mechanical hum, no buzzing from electronics. I scanned the horizon, No bright spots, no silhouettes. I felt some relief, but I also felt uneasy, like maybe it was just waiting for me to let my guard down. I passed the area without seeing anything unusual that night, but the tension stayed in my body for another hour. By the time I reached my destination, my shoulders were stiff and my lower back ached from being so tense. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself that I'd just spooked myself over nothing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't nothing. In the months that followed, I heard more stories from locals. A farmer said he once saw lights zigzagging above his field. Another guy who works as a trucker claimed he saw something shoot straight up into the clouds and disappear. Nobody offered a conclusive explanation. Nobody seemed too alarmed either. They just accepted it as one of those things that happen occasionally. But for me, it was new and unsettling. Now every time I drive that road, I feel the same rush of anxiety. My hands get clammy, and I have to remind myself to breathe normally. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of a distant light in the sky and tense up. It's almost always a plane or a star, but my heart still jumps. I haven't seen that exact phenomenon again, at least not as clearly or up close, but the memory stays fresh. I can still see that bright white glow in my mind, perfectly still, then zipping sideways at impossible speed. I can't say for sure what I saw. It felt real, and it looked impossible. All I know is that it changed how I look at those fields and that quiet stretch of road. Even now, I don't like to linger out there. I'll fill up on gas before I leave town so I don't have to stop. I keep the radio off to listen for anything unusual. I pay attention to the sky more than I ever did before. It's become a habit I can't shake. And whenever I pass that specific spot, I get a knot in my stomach. I guess part of me expects that bright light to come back and hover there again, just to remind me I can't explain everything. But it hasn't happened again, at least not yet. That's it. That's my story. I'm not adding any fancy details or poetic twists because the plain facts are strange enough. There was a light above the corn, it moved in ways I can't explain, and then it disappeared without a trace. I've heard similar accounts from a few people who live around here. I don't have an official explanation. I just know it rattled me pretty bad, and I'm still uneasy when I have to drive that lonely road at night. People can believe me or not. That's up to them. I'm just sharing exactly what I saw, how I felt, and how it stuck with me. If there's more to it, I haven't found any real answers. And that's the truth. I never expected to find myself shaking in my own home at 3 a.m, but that's exactly what happened in that old ground floor apartment. I'd been looking for a place in a central area, and this one seemed perfect on paper. The building was in a convenient neighborhood, rent was surprisingly low, and the landlord seemed normal enough. Still, from the moment I carried in my first box, I felt an odd chill. It was midsummer, and I remember wiping sweat from my forehead when I was outside, then feeling goosebumps run up my arms as I stepped inside. That contrast was impossible to ignore. I wasn't about to walk away from a great deal, though. I thought maybe the walls had thick insulation or something, but it became clear, very fast, that the cold went beyond any normal explanation. I moved in on a Sunday afternoon. The building's entrance was up a small set of concrete steps, then a hallway led to my unit on the left. Since my apartment was technically at ground level, the windows faced an enclosed backyard. Sunlight was limited, which I assumed caused the temperature difference. That first day, I was unpacking kitchenware when I noticed the stale air. It felt heavy. I kept opening and closing the windows in the living room, trying to bring in a breeze, but nothing improved. The place stayed cold and stale. My initial reaction was frustration, but I tried to ignore it. It was already late, and I wanted to sleep. That first night, I lay in bed under 2 blankets, which was weird for summer. I usually can't stand even a light sheet over me in hot weather, but in this apartment I felt like I needed layers. My bedroom was small, just big enough for a queen-size mattress, a dresser, and a tiny nightstand. The paint on the walls looked old, almost peeling in some spots, and the wooden floor had cracks that creaked when I stepped near the door. I heard those cracks at random times, even when I was lying still. It sounded as if someone was walking around. The first time I heard it, I sat up and switched on my lamp. The room was empty. I told myself old buildings settle. Wood warps. It's normal. I tried to sleep, but halfway through the night, I heard light tapping from the living room. At least that's where I thought it came from. It was faint, like knuckles lightly striking a tabletop. I turned on my bedside lamp again. I listened, holding my breath. The tapping stopped. I waited in silence for a few minutes. Nothing. I eventually fell asleep, but I woke up a couple hours later, shivering. The bedroom was ice cold. My phone said it was 3 in the morning. I got up, rubbed my arms, and turned on the overhead light. My breath didn't turn into vapor, but I felt as if it almost could. I went out to the living room to check if the windows were open. They were all closed. I felt the walls near the windows to see if there was some draft. They were just cold to the touch, solid, with no noticeable air leaks. I ended up boiling some water to make tea. As I stood in the kitchen with the kettle on, I kept glancing at the dark corridor leading to my bedroom. It felt like I wasn't alone. That thought made my hands tremble a bit, so I tried to focus on the tea. Eventually, I went back to bed and forced myself to sleep. Over the next week, I got used to wearing a sweatshirt or jacket around the apartment. Even in the morning, the chill never left. I adjusted, but it still felt off. I chatted with a neighbor on the second floor. He said his unit was normal temperature and joked that maybe I should ask for a rent discount. Another neighbor mentioned that the building had some history, but he didn't go into details. I didn't press. I'm not the kind of person who believes in haunted places, but the apartment's atmosphere made me uneasy. The noises got worse. At night, the floor sounds turned into subtle pops and distant cracks. Sometimes I heard faint thuds along the corridor walls. I inspected the hallway a few times. The walls looked fine, except for chipped paint. No visible holes or damage. The corridor light bulb blew out 2 days after I replaced it. I unscrewed it, tried a different bulb, and it went out the next day too. I called the landlord, who sent an electrician. The electrician checked the wiring, outlets, everything. He said the system was old but functional. He didn't see any reason for bulbs to blow that quickly. One night, I heard something I can only describe as a murmur. It sounded like a low conversation. I couldn't make out words, but it was a steady noise rising and falling like a soft argument. I walked through the apartment, pressing my ear to the walls. In the corridor, the sound was clearer, but still muffled. It stopped whenever I moved around too much. But if I stood still, I heard it again. It was so subtle that sometimes I thought I was imagining it. I recorded it with my phone's microphone. When I listened to the playback, all I got was garbled static. I tried again with a small digital recorder I had. Same result. White noise with a few weird clicks. I stayed up late that night, pressing the recorder against various spots on the wall. It captured nothing but static. At that point, I started checking the entire apartment for old vents or hidden spaces. I wondered if there was some weird ventilation issue that carried sounds from a neighboring unit. I found nothing. The walls were solid. I tapped on them and only got dull thuds. No echo or hollowness. I considered the possibility that I was dealing with a neighbor in an adjacent apartment, but whenever I saw those neighbors in the hallway, they told me they heard nothing similar, and their places didn't suffer from the same cold. They looked at me like I was paranoid or making it up. One evening, I decided to invite a friend over. I wanted someone else to confirm what I was experiencing. My friend Luis arrived around 7 p.m. As soon as he walked in, he commented on the temperature. He kept rubbing his arms, and I ended up lending him a thick hoodie. We ate pizza in the living room, talking about random stuff, waiting for the usual noises. The place was quiet for hours. We stayed up until almost midnight without hearing anything. Luis was about to leave, rolling his eyes in a friendly way, teasing me for my haunted apartment, when the floor near the bedroom creaked. It was a small noise, but it got our attention. We stayed silent. Then we heard this faint tapping sound, maybe 3 soft taps, coming from the corridor. Luis got up, walked over, flicked on the corridor light, and it died within seconds. Just flickered once and went out. He let out a quick, "What the hell?" and stepped back. That moment confirmed everything for me. It wasn't my imagination. I grabbed my flashlight from the kitchen drawer. We examined the corridor. Nothing looked out of place. Luis asked if there was a draft or a short circuit. I explained I'd already had the wiring checked. We stood there for another minute. The tapping stopped, and we heard a slow creaking near the bedroom door, like someone was leaning against it. Luis opened the bedroom door fast. Nothing. An empty room. But that space felt colder. The air hit me hard. My friend's face got serious. He left not long after that, saying the vibe was too uncomfortable. He admitted something didn't feel right. I spent a few more nights with the lights on, even while trying to sleep. The noise patterns continued, especially between 2 and 3 in the morning. The whispered murmurs came back, as if people were talking a few feet away. I tried recording multiple times. Sometimes I stayed up just listening in silence. My heart would beat fast whenever I heard the first sign of that low chatter. It made my stomach clench. My throat would feel tight. My palms would get clammy. I'd stand there with my phone in my hand, shaking a bit, pressing record and hoping I'd catch a clear sentence or a clue. But every file was just static and faint, clicking pops. Eventually, I made a habit of playing background music to drown it out. That's when the flickering lights started happening more often. In the kitchen, the overhead light would dim for a moment and then return to normal. The bathroom bulb burned out once. I changed it and the new one died 2 days later. I tried to keep my routine as normal as possible. I went to work, came home, made dinner, watched TV, but I felt on edge, constantly aware of these weird details. Sometimes I sat in the living room, wearing 2 layers of clothing, hugging a mug of hot coffee, staring at the walls. The temperature never improved. I considered buying a portable heater, but it was summer, and I felt ridiculous. Also, I was short on cash. Rent was cheaper than usual for this area, but I still had bills. My finances weren't great, and I didn't want to spend more if I didn't have to. One afternoon, I visited a local hardware store and asked the guy there about insulation or cracks that could cause extreme cold. He suggested a thorough inspection with a thermal camera, but that service wasn't cheap. I asked the landlord if he would pay for it. He refused. Said everything was fine, that other tenants never complained that much. I realized I was stuck with a problem I couldn't prove. Things reached a new level when I started waking up abruptly with the feeling of someone standing next to my bed. I'd open my eyes, and the room would be pitch dark except for the glow of the streetlight outside. I'd feel my heart pounding, and I'd keep still, listening. Sometimes I heard a quick shuffle on the floor, sometimes just silence. My body would freeze. It wasn't like a nightmare because I was wide awake. My back would tense up and I'd grip the edges of the blanket. Then I'd turn on the lamp, breathing hard, scanning the room. Nothing was there, but my skin felt tight with anxiety. After a few seconds, my pulse would slow and I'd get out of bed, check the rest of the place. Every time it was empty. I didn't tell many people about these details because it sounded crazy. My friend Luis believed me to a degree, but he wasn't experiencing it nightly. Over time, the exhaustion set in. I was tired at work. I started dreading bedtime. The cold made it even worse because it kept me uncomfortable. I'd wrap myself in a blanket on the couch and leave the TV on until I fell asleep. But I'd still wake up at odd hours, hearing that murmur or noticing the flicker of lights. After a month, I decided to set up a series of audio recorders around the apartment while I went to bed. I had my phone, my digital recorder, and an old MP3 player with a recording function. I placed them in different rooms, just to see if the static appeared everywhere. The next morning, I replayed the files. The living room recording started normal, just distant city sounds from outside. Then around 2:45 a.m., the track got heavy with distortion. It sounded like radio interference, maybe some kind of electrical noise. The bedroom recorder had similar static. I thought I heard faint voices under the static, but nothing clear. The MP3 player in the corridor captured a bizarre whistling sound. It lasted a few seconds, then cut off abruptly. I listened to it at least a dozen times, trying to figure out if it was the wind. It sounded too steady, like a single drawn-out note. I brought these files to a coworker who's good with audio editing. He tried cleaning them up, but the static only got louder when he amplified the volume. He said it might be electromagnetic interference from old wiring or a nearby power source. That still didn't explain the consistent cold air or the tapping noises, but I didn't argue. I was too drained to keep searching for answers. The strangest part is that no one else in the building reported these same problems. It felt like whatever was happening was confined to my unit. Every time I left the apartment, I felt relieved. The warmth outside made me relax. My back loosened and I took deeper breaths. But when I walked back in, that stale chill clung to me again. I kept telling myself I'd move out soon, but I didn't have enough savings to break the lease. My landlord refused to let me out early without a fee. I felt stuck. Eventually, I just started ignoring the whispers and the tapping as best as I could. If the lights flickered, I rolled my eyes and kept going. If I felt a presence by my bed, I turned on the lamp, checked quickly, then forced myself to sleep. But deep down, I couldn't relax. There was always that feeling of another presence. Sometimes I let the bedroom door stay open with the hall light on, as if that would keep whatever was out there at bay. Sometimes I closed the door completely, hoping I wouldn't hear anything through it. Neither option helped much. By the time I hit the 6-month mark, I was counting days until I could legally move. My neighbor upstairs asked me how things were going, and I just told him the place was still cold. I didn't mention the strange activity anymore because I knew no one could fix it. I called the electrician 2 more times for the constant burnt bulbs. Each time he shrugged and replaced some wiring in the hallway. The problem never stopped. In the end, I never discovered the true cause of that unsettling cold or the static-filled whispers. Maybe there's some logical explanation hidden inside the building's old walls. But every time I remember that apartment, I feel a heavy knot in my stomach. I still remember those sleepless nights, the tapping by the bedroom door, the flickering lights, and that feeling of not being alone. I don't claim I lived with a ghost or anything like that. All I know is that something in that place never left. It was there before me, and I'm sure it's still there now, waiting for the next tenant to walk in and feel the chill on their very first day. I never gave much thought to strange noises in old buildings. I always assumed the stories were exaggerations. People love to stir up rumors. But the night I heard metal clanking inside that abandoned storage facility changed everything. I can't ignore what happened. I can't brush off the way my hands trembled afterward. I can't forget the shape I saw between those dusty shelves. It wasn't my imagination. I know that now, and I'm here to tell you exactly how it went down. I'm a reservist in a branch of the military. I left active duty a while back, but they call me in sometimes for security shifts or odd surveillance jobs. It's usually dull work, watching gates, checking fences, walking around empty warehouses. Most nights, I just kill time until dawn, sign my paperwork, and go home. This place, though, is different. It's an old storage compound that used to house supplies. It's basically a massive metal structure in the middle of a half-abandoned base. There's a chain-link fence around the perimeter, a few floodlights on tall poles, and not much else. The building itself has long aisles, tall shelving units, and a musty smell of rust and old cardboard. I'd heard rumors from other reservists. They whispered about doors opening on their own, about footsteps echoing at odd hours, about weird cold spots in certain corners. I chalked it up to typical ghost story nonsense people tell in the military. Everyone has a tale. Usually, they just want to spook the new guys. I'd roll my eyes whenever someone started in on that supernatural stuff. But I kept hearing about it, and eventually, I got assigned a shift there myself. I remember signing the order and thinking, it's going to be a quiet night. The first couple of nights, it was pretty normal. I'd walk the perimeter, check the gates, make sure the padlocks were still secure. Then I'd duck inside for a short inspection, flipping on my flashlight and walking down each aisle. I saw cobwebs, dusty floors, a few rats scurrying around, but nothing else. No voices, no eerie footsteps, no lights flickering. After a while, I got comfortable. I'd just take a short round, then sit near the door and sip coffee from my thermos while listening to the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then I'd do another round at the top of every hour, log my findings, and wait until my shift ended. On the third or fourth night, I heard a clang of metal echo through the building. It was around midnight. I just finished walking around the outside of the facility. I'd checked the side gate and put a padlock on it. Everything seemed in order. I walked back inside through the main entrance and locked it behind me. I remember thinking the place felt extra cold. It wasn't winter, so I wasn't expecting it. I shrugged it off and started my usual route between the shelves. That's when I heard it. This sharp metallic sound, like two pipes slamming together. I stopped and listened. My heartbeat picked up. There was a faint ringing in my ears. Part of me thought it was the wind or some loose sheet of metal swinging somewhere. But the clang happened again, and this time I could tell it came from deeper in the building toward the far wall where the old storage cages were located. I felt a wave of nervous energy go through my chest. I'm used to checking for intruders and dealing with the unexpected, but something about that noise put me on edge. I made my way down the main aisle, stepping carefully to avoid kicking any debris. The overhead emergency lights were off, which was normal, so the only illumination came from my flashlight. I felt the cold seeping into my uniform. I could smell dust and damp cardboard. My boots made little scraping sounds as I moved. I was trying to stay quiet, but every step felt louder than usual. The clang came again, then stopped. It echoed for a few seconds, then faded out. I reached the back corner. There was a side gate there, just as rumored. I kept it locked with a sturdy padlock. At least that's what I thought. But the gate was open. Wide open. The chain was on the floor. The padlock was undone, just lying there like someone had tossed it aside. My stomach tightened. I started breathing faster. I didn't know how anyone could have cut that lock without me hearing it or noticing the damage. But it wasn't even cut. It was intact, just unlatched. I stepped through the open gate and looked around the side corridor that led outside. Nothing. No footprints, no tools. Just concrete walls and a steel door at the end. The door was shut. I tried to pull it open, but it was stuck. It felt locked from the outside. I shoved it a couple of times, but it didn't budge. Then I heard a weird click behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight. The beam landed on empty shelving units. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like I could hear the pulse in my ears. I took a breath and forced myself to walk back inside. As soon as I did, the emergency lights flicked on. They weren't supposed to come on unless there was a power outage. But the overhead system was still off and we hadn't lost main power. It didn't make sense. The emergency lights cast a dull glow across the aisles, just enough to see silhouettes of old boxes and metal racks. I felt this sudden shiver crawl up my back. Then I saw a shape near the center row, half hidden behind a tall set of shelves. At first I thought it was a trick of the light or a reflection of my own shadow. But it moved. It shifted, then leaned out a bit. I saw a figure about my height wearing something dark. I couldn't make out details of the face. The light behind it created this outline, and I could see the shape of shoulders and a head. It was looking right at me. I froze in place. My mouth went dry. My flashlight's beam shook because my hands were trembling. I couldn't bring myself to speak. I just stared. The figure took a few steps back, almost gliding behind the shelves, and vanished into the dim light at the far end of the building. My heart pounded. I felt adrenaline flood my system. I wanted to chase it down. I wanted to confirm if there was an intruder or if my mind was playing tricks on me. So I jogged in that direction, calling out, "Hey, stop!" My voice echoed. My boots thumped on the floor. I turned a corner and only found emptiness. No footsteps, no open doors, just row after row of rusted shelving and some old cans scattered around. I slowed down and listened. Everything was silent except for my own breathing. My arms felt tense. I kept swallowing, trying to stop the dryness in my throat. I checked the floor for footprints or fresh marks, but the dust was so thick that it didn't show anything clear. There were a few scattered boxes, some old crates, and a pile of empty cans near the wall. One of those cans was still rocking back and forth, making a soft scraping sound against the concrete, like it had just been kicked. I stared at it, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I took another route through the building, checking every aisle. My hand kept hovering near my sidearm. It's standard procedure to carry one, but I didn't want to draw it unless I was certain of a threat. Part of me hoped I'd find some homeless guy who'd broken in, or maybe some reckless teenager messing around. But I found no one. The tension in my stomach grew heavier. I kept thinking about that silhouette, the way it seemed to stare straight at me. After about 15 minutes, I circled back to the side gate. It was still open. The chain lay on the ground. I grabbed it, locked it up again, double-checking that the latch was secure. It was fine. The padlock worked. I tugged on the gate a few times. It stayed shut. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to gather my thoughts. Then I felt a chill behind me, like a draft of cold air. I turned around, shining my flashlight, but I only saw an empty corridor and a few dusty pallets stacked against the wall. The rest of the night was quiet. Nothing else rattled. No more clanking sounds. The emergency lights eventually turned off, returning the place to its normal dim state. I didn't see that figure again. I stayed on edge, though. I paced around, checking corners, shining my flashlight down every path. At one point, I even tapped my radio to see if I could get someone to come out and help me search. But it felt silly. What was I going to say? That I saw a shape? That some lights flickered? I didn't want to sound like a rookie who spooked himself over nothing, so I kept quiet. When my shift ended, I hurried outside as soon as my replacement arrived. I told him to keep an eye on the side gate, told him I found it open. He just nodded, half asleep. I drove away, feeling unsettled. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a gust of wind blew the gate open. Maybe a fuse caused the emergency lights to blink. Maybe my eyes were tired, and I imagined that shape. But I knew deep down that didn't add up. I had another shift 2 nights later. I dreaded returning, but I also felt a twisted sort of curiosity. I wanted to see if anything else would happen. The next time I was there, everything felt off. The building's quiet seemed heavier. Every little noise made me jump. The fluorescent overheads flickered once in a while, but nothing like the emergency lights turning on by themselves. I kept expecting to see something peek out from behind the shelves. I thought I heard faint steps once, but it turned out to be my own echo. After that, I forced myself to walk calmly and stay alert. I finished my shift with no major incidents, but I couldn't relax the entire time. Over the weeks, I heard stories from other guys who had shifts there. They mentioned hearing metal clanks. They mentioned seeing a shape in the aisles. One guy swore he felt someone brush past him in the dark. Another guy found the side gate open even though it was locked at the start of his shift. None of them had a good explanation. They all seemed spooked. I noticed that whenever I brought it up, they got quiet. Nobody wanted to sound crazy, but we all knew something strange was going on. I had a few more shifts in that warehouse. I never got a clear look at that figure again. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of motion out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing. Sometimes I'd hear faint tapping or the rattle of a chain. Once or twice, I caught a door open that I could have sworn I locked, but nothing concrete. It was more like the place itself was playing games with me, almost like it wanted me to know it was there, but not to prove it in any real way. My chest would tighten whenever I had to step inside that building. My senses felt sharper. I'd notice every smell, the stale air, the faint odor of oil or paint, the hint of rotting cardboard. My palms would sweat, and my breathing would come in short bursts if I heard any unusual noise. My heart rate would spike, and I'd grip my flashlight tighter. I'd keep scanning the corners, hoping not to see that silhouette. But at the same time, I wanted to see it, just so I could figure out who Or what it was. One night near the end of my rotation, I did my standard walkthrough. I went along the perimeter, locked every door, tested each chain, and made sure the side gate was secure. Then I stepped inside and turned on my flashlight. The overhead lights were on but dim, giving the whole place a dull, lifeless glow. I walked aisle by aisle, checking for any intruders. I heard nothing but the hum of the lights. My footsteps felt heavy. I tried not to let my imagination get the better of me. When I reached the far end, I paused for a moment. I looked toward the corner where I first saw that shape. Everything was still. The shelves were loaded with old boxes, some of them torn or partially open. The place smelled like old rope and metal. Then, for just a second, I thought I saw someone standing there again. Just a quick flicker. I snapped my head around, shining my flashlight. There was nothing. My pulse raced, but I saw only dusty shelves and a couple of empty cans on the floor. I stood there for a while, trying to slow my breathing. My face felt hot and I could feel sweat on the back of my neck. I said in a low voice, "I know you're here." No answer. I didn't really expect one, but I felt the need to say something. After that, I finished my checks and left. Once I was outside, I breathed in fresh air and felt a little relief, but the tension stayed with me. I never figured out who or what opened that gate that night. I never figured out why the emergency lights switched on by themselves. I never got a good look at that figure's face, and I guess I never will. But I know it wasn't a dream or a hallucination. I felt it. I saw it. That place holds something, and I think it wants people to notice it, even though it never sticks around long enough for anyone to confront it. I still get assigned there once in a while. Every time I lock everything up and triple check. I stay alert. Sometimes I get that prickly feeling on my skin, like someone's watching. Sometimes I hear a distant clang or a scraping sound. Occasionally, I'll see a faint shadow move, but it never shows itself fully. It just reminds me it's there, then disappears. Now, whenever someone brings up the weird rumors about that old warehouse, I don't roll my eyes. I just nod and say, "I've heard a thing or two," because I don't need to convince them. I know what I saw, and I know that place still hides a presence that likes to be seen but never truly identified. I got my first real jolt when I heard the drawer slam in the empty department next door. That sound wasn't faint. It was loud enough to snap me upright in my chair, and I felt my pulse jump. I'm a pretty calm guy, but something about hearing a drawer open and close in a locked room after hours made my stomach tighten. That was only the beginning. I work in a small accounting office located in an old building. The place has high ceilings, creaky floors, and long, dim hallways that always seem to stretch on forever. At night, nobody stays past 6. Since I started putting in overtime, I've been the only one walking around those corridors when the lights are low and the doors are locked. It didn't take long for me to realize I wasn't entirely alone. I'm a regular guy. I'm an accountant, mid-30s, and I prefer routine. I usually arrive at the office by 8 in the morning, handle my tasks, and leave around 5 or 6. But this year, we got slammed with a ton of extra work. I found myself agreeing to stay later, sometimes until 8 or 9 at night. At first, I didn't mind. The silence helped me focus. I could hear the hum of the old fluorescent lights and my own breathing. There weren't any distractions. It felt calm. But then I started noticing small noises. Sometimes I'd hear a door creak in the hallway. Other times I'd hear soft tapping on the floor above me. I knew I was supposed to be alone. The building's security guard usually left by 7, and he was stationed near the main entrance, not upstairs. The cleaning crew only came on weekends. After a few nights, I told myself these sounds were just the building settling or pipes knocking. The place is old, so it seemed logical. But that drawer slamming shook me. It wasn't a faint click or a subtle thump. It was a definite bang, like someone pulled it open and then shoved it shut. I remember standing up from my desk with my heart pounding. I walked into the hallway, flipping on the overhead lights. The corridor was empty, just a few closed doors and the water cooler in the corner. I decided to go next door, where I believed the sound came from. That department handles payroll, and their office is always locked after 5. I reached for the handle. Locked, as usual. No sign of forced entry, no reason for a drawer to move on its own. I felt a strong urge to turn around and leave the building right then, but I had deadlines. I told myself it must have been some weird echo from another room. I returned to my desk feeling tense. I tried to focus on spreadsheets, but it was impossible to shake that uneasy feeling. A couple of nights later, I stayed late again. This time, I heard a faint clicking noise near the end of the hallway. It sounded like a switch being flicked on and off. When I walked to investigate, I saw one of the offices with its lights on. I knew nobody was inside. This particular office belongs to a partner who always leaves exactly at 5. I peeked through the small window on the door. The chairs were empty, the desks neat. I opened the door, and the lights went off on their own. I stood there in the dark, the switch on the wall in the off position. My stomach clenched. I flipped the switch on, and the lights came back. Then I turned them off, left the room, and stood in the hallway feeling confused. I had no explanation. I locked the door behind me and headed back to my desk. Another unsettling thing happened in the bathroom. I was washing my face to shake off some drowsiness. Our bathroom has this old mirror with a slight crack in the corner. While I was drying my face, I caught a glimpse of a shape behind me in the reflection. It was like a dark outline of a person, not distinct, but enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through me. My chest tightened, and I spun around. There was nobody there. My first thought was that maybe someone had walked in, but the door was closed. I even pushed it open to check the hallway. Completely empty. My heart thumped so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. My hands were clammy. I left the bathroom without drying my hands, flicked off the light, and went back to my desk in a hurry. After that mirror incident, I decided to talk to one of my older co-workers. He's been at the firm for over 15 years, so I figured he might have heard some kind of rumor or old story about the building. I tried to keep my tone casual. I didn't want to sound like I believed in ghosts or anything like that. I just mentioned I was hearing strange noises and seeing lights on when they shouldn't be. He leaned in and said he'd had the same experiences. He's usually out by 5, but on the few occasions he stayed late, he heard doors opening when he knew they were locked. He also heard footsteps upstairs when nobody was supposed to be there. He told me he'd never felt threatened, just uneasy, like something was watching him from corners. I felt a chill run down my arms. I still had a lot of work to do, so I couldn't just stop staying late. But after talking to my coworker, I realized I wasn't imagining things. That night, I stayed again until around 8. I brought a small flashlight with me just in case. The main lights in the corridors are old and sometimes flicker. I was sitting at my desk, immersed in a client's documents, when the overhead light in my office blinked twice and then stayed on. I tried to ignore it, but the blinking repeated every couple of minutes. It wasn't a random flicker. It was as if someone was flipping a switch somewhere. My heart pounded every time it blinked. The hair on my arm stood up. I felt hot and sweaty, even though the air conditioner was running. Around 8:30, I decided I'd had enough. I started packing up my papers when I heard a noise behind me that made my skin crawl. It was a soft whisper, almost like someone exhaling. I spun around in my chair. Nobody. My office door was half closed, and I swear I saw a slight movement in the hallway outside. It could have been a flicker of light, but my instincts told me something was there. I jumped up, walked to the door, and yanked it open. The hallway was empty, the lights were steady, and the air felt still. I didn't want to linger any longer. I stuffed the rest of my stuff into my bag, shut down my computer, and switched off the office lights. Then I realized I had to walk through that same corridor to reach the stairs. I stepped into the hallway, trying to stay calm. My shoes echoed on the old wooden floors. My breathing felt shallow. I kept glancing at the closed doors on each side, half expecting one to swing open. One door handle rattled when I walked past, but I forced myself to keep going. My back felt prickly, like I was being watched, and my legs were tense. I moved quickly but tried not to break into a run. I reached the stairwell, gripped the handrail, and started descending. The lights in the stairwell are weak. There's this faint buzzing noise coming from the fluorescent tubes. My footsteps sounded too loud in that enclosed space. I kept looking over my shoulder, but all I saw was the empty landing. The next morning, I arrived at work feeling exhausted. I had trouble sleeping after that night. I told my coworker about the drawer noise, the lights, the whisper, and the door handle that seemed to rattle by itself. He gave me a look of concern and said something like, "Yeah, man, this place is old. I don't know what's up here after hours, but it's not just in your head." He told me he avoids staying late for that exact reason. He said the last time he stayed late, he felt a presence follow him from his office to the elevator. He couldn't explain it, but he felt breathing on the back of his neck. When he turned around, nobody was there. Hearing his story didn't make me feel better, but it confirmed I wasn't losing my mind. Over the next few weeks, I tried to keep my late nights to a minimum. Sometimes I had no choice, especially during tax season. Each time I stayed, something odd happened. One night, I heard footsteps in the corridor outside my office. They started near the end of the hall and moved closer to my door. The steps were slow. I could hear each foot press against the floor. Then they stopped. I sat there staring at the door, waiting for it to open or for a knock. Nothing. My palms were sweaty, and my heart was racing. I stood up, opened the door, and found the hallway empty, as always. Another time I saw a flicker of movement through the window of the break room. It looked like someone walked past the counter. I assumed maybe a coworker had stayed late, so I rushed over to say hi. Nobody was there. The lights were off, the chairs were stacked, and the coffee maker was cold. I stood in that empty break room, listening to my own pulse pounding. My stomach felt tight. I could feel goosebumps on my arms. I backed out of the room and shut the door, feeling a rush of anxiety. These events got more frequent. One evening, I walked past one of the conference rooms. I could see through the glass panel on the door. The overhead light was flickering and the chairs were arranged around the table. Then I noticed a chair move by itself. It was a slight movement, but it slid an inch away from the table. My mouth went dry. I wasn't imagining it. I stepped back and the chair jerked another inch. I froze. Then the light inside the conference room flickered a few more times and went off. I stood in the hallway, feeling my heart pound like a hammer. I left the building as soon as I could that night. The worst part was the constant feeling of being watched. It was like there were eyes on me whenever I walked through the corridors or used the elevator. Even in my office, I sometimes sensed a presence standing behind me. I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a figure. It never showed itself fully, just hints. A shape in the corner of my vision, a shadow passing by, a faint creak on the floor. As the weeks went on, I developed little rituals to cope. I kept my phone close, set to record audio whenever I heard something strange, but I never caught anything clear. I also started leaving the door to my office wide open so I could see the hallway. That made me feel a bit safer, but it didn't stop the noises. Sometimes the overhead lights in the hallway would flicker in a pattern that felt deliberate, like something was toying with me. Other times, the temperature in my office would drop for a few moments, even though the thermostat was steady. I'd feel a cold breeze against my neck, but no vents were near me. I avoided using the bathroom mirror at night. I didn't want to see that reflection again. I'd do my business, wash my hands, and stare at the sink instead of my face. One time, the door to one of the stalls creaked open by itself. I didn't bother checking. I just got out of there. My hands were still dripping water when I hit the hallway. One Monday, I decided to try a different approach. I took an earlier lunch and planned to stay through the evening without leaving for dinner, so I could finish as early as possible and get out before dark. But the work dragged on, and around 7, the sun went down. The building got quiet again, and my nerves kicked in. I wrapped up around 7:30, feeling uneasy. As I was heading toward the stairs, I heard a crash. It sounded like something heavy fell near the other side of the floor. I froze. My back stiffened. I turned around to see if I could spot any movement. Nothing. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe a shelf tipped over or a large binder fell, but I couldn't ignore it. I walked slowly toward the sound. Every step felt like a mile. When I reached the corridor, I saw a large metal trash can lying on its side. Trash was scattered on the floor. Nobody was around. I felt my neck tense up. I picked up the can, shoved the trash back in, and decided I was finished for the night. Now, whenever I work late, I can't relax. My chest feels tight, and I stay hyper-aware of every sound. I can't focus on my spreadsheets or numbers. I'm always listening for footsteps, rattling doors, or the flick of a light switch. Sometimes I lock my office door just to create a barrier, even though I know it won't do much good if something is determined to show up. My older coworker keeps telling me to talk to the boss about leaving earlier. I'm seriously considering it. This constant tension is making me jumpy at home too. Every small noise in my apartment sets me on edge. Even as I share this now, I can feel that old apprehension building in my chest. I can picture those deserted corridors with their dull lights and the silence that seems to follow me around every corner. I can recall the slight movement I saw in the mirror, the flickering lights in the offices, and the sudden noises that can't be explained. They keep happening, and nobody has a solid explanation. The building manager blames old wiring and structural issues, but that doesn't account for drawers slamming, or the feeling of someone right behind me when I'm alone in the bathroom. I still work there. I still stay late when I have to, but I don't waste any time. The second my tasks are done, I pack up fast and head for the stairs. I keep my keys in hand, sometimes with my phone's flashlight on, because the lights in the stairwell can flicker too. I don't linger in the hallway, and I don't stop by the bathroom mirror unless I absolutely have to. Most nights I manage to leave without anything too dramatic happening. But that creepy tension never goes away. I always feel like I'm being watched as I make my way down those steps. It's a constant crawling sensation on the back of my neck. By the time I reach the lobby, I'm practically out of breath. So that's the story. That's what's happening in my small accounting office. I don't know if it's some leftover energy in the old building or something else. All I know is that these experiences are real enough to make my heart race and my palms sweat. People can dismiss it if they want, but I've lived it. I've heard and seen enough to understand why so many of my coworkers never stay after hours, and I wish I could do the same. But until we hire more staff or my workload shrinks, I'm stuck with these uneasy nights. When I finally leave, I hurry across the lobby, out the door and into the open air, grateful to be away from those corridors. But the memory stays with me, and I can still feel that odd, watchful presence clinging to me even after I'm gone. I work at an old ski resort that hasn't operated for years. I'm in charge of keeping an eye on the place at night. My job is to make sure no one comes in to steal the equipment or damage the cables. I didn't expect anything unusual when I first started, but things got weird about a week ago. That was the night I saw the gondola move on its own, and I noticed a figure standing inside one of the cabins. I want to explain exactly what happened. I'm not trying to make this sound dramatic or mysterious. I just need to describe it in detail so it's clear why I'm still on edge. The first sign something was off came when I walked past the control panel and heard a clicking noise. It was around 11:15 p.m. The entire ski lift system was supposed to be shut down. The power was off and the main breakers were locked. I had checked them twice during my shift. That's my standard routine. I confirm all switches are off and then I do a patrol around the towers. That night I heard a sharp click. It sounded like a switch turning on, so I went back to the main control panel. The lights on the panel were off, but I felt warmth in the metal frame like some current was running through it. I stood there for a moment, not sure if I was imagining things. Then the wind picked up, and I heard the cables swaying. I looked out the window of the small control room. There are big windows that overlook the base of the lift and the towers up the slope. The security lights on the towers usually stay steady, but I saw the last tower's light flicker. It wasn't a slow flicker. It was more like a fast, rhythmic blinking. I decided to go outside. I put on my jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped onto the concrete landing by the main station. The ground was uneven and covered in old, cracked asphalt. There was a faint crunch under my boots from the gravel and loose pieces of pavement. I shined my flashlight toward the top of the mountain. The last tower is pretty far up. It's near the highest point, and there's only one long stretch of cable beyond it, where the gondolas turn around and come back. The light kept flickering. I tried to focus on it, but the wind made my eyes water. I moved around the side of the station where I keep a small snowmobile. I don't actually use it for transportation at night unless there's heavy snow, but I keep it there for emergencies. The path up to that last tower is a steep incline covered in patches of ice. I considered driving the snowmobile up, but I didn't want to risk sliding off the trail in the dark. So I started walking, shining my flashlight ahead, watching my breath form small clouds in the cold air. As I got closer, I heard a low humming noise. It reminded me of the sound the lift motors make when they're running normally, but it was quieter, like it was coming from inside the metal structure of the tower. The blinking light was right above me once I reached the base of the tower. I tried to see if maybe a loose wire was causing it, but everything looked in place. Then I heard a whirring from the cable overhead. It wasn't a strong sound, just a slight shift, like something was moving. When I looked up, I saw a gondola drifting along the cable. This shouldn't happen with the power off. The gondola usually stays locked in place. Even if there's a little wind, it doesn't move that far. This thing was sliding slowly, maybe a foot per second. I couldn't figure out how. I aimed my flashlight at it, and I saw a dark shape inside. It looked like a person standing still, facing my direction. I couldn't see the face. It was just a silhouette behind the cloudy plexiglass window. The gondola kept moving until it was about 10 feet from the tower. Then it stopped. My stomach tightened, and my mouth felt dry. I wondered if there was some prankster messing with me. I thought about yelling, but I wasn't sure what to say. Eventually I shouted, "Hey, do you need help?" My voice sounded shaky. The wind carried it away pretty fast. Then something happened. The gondola jerked upward along the cable and rose a few more feet. It stopped again. I thought I heard a faint metallic click, like a brake engaging. I looked around for a ladder or a stairway so I could climb up and see if the person was okay. But there's no easy way to reach the gondolas from the ground unless they're at the station. The tower is just a tall structure with a narrow maintenance ladder that goes to the top where the pulley is. It's not built for easy access to the cabin. I took a few steps back, trying to figure out what to do. The air was freezing. My hands felt stiff. I remember my heart racing so hard that I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Then I heard a strange scraping noise near the control housing at the base of the tower. It's a small metal cabinet with switches for local maintenance. I approached it and I saw that the latch was still locked. I tugged on it to make sure it hadn't been tampered with. I felt a bit of relief, thinking maybe the movement was just the wind, but that didn't explain the figure in the gondola. When I looked back up, the cabin was empty. The door was slightly open, swaying in the wind. There was no one inside. I shined the flashlight around the side of the gondola, trying to see if someone had climbed out onto the tower. That idea made no sense, though, because the gondola was too high off the ground. But no one was there. I noticed a flicker again from the tower light, and then the humming noise stopped. Everything felt silent except for the wind. I walked back down to the main station with my mind racing. I kept looking over my shoulder at the lift line, half expecting to see the cabin moving again. By the time I got back, I was a little out of breath from the climb and the tension in my chest. I checked the control panel again. Everything was still switched off. I opened the panel door and ran my hand over the circuit breakers. They were all in the off position. There was no mechanical reason for the gondola to be running. I stayed up the rest of the night pacing around the station, checking the perimeter, looking at the cables. I felt jumpy. My shoulders were tense and my back ached from standing in the cold. I thought about calling the security company that oversees the property, but I didn't want to sound like an idiot. I've only been working here for a few months, and I didn't want them to think I was spooked by my own shadow. The next evening, it happened again. This time, I was at the station around 11:30 p.m. I was going over a checklist of tasks I do every night, checking the gates, verifying the locks on the outside doors of the lodge, and making sure the fences around the equipment were secure. I heard the same clicking noise from the control panel. This time I went straight to the window and looked out. The tower light at the top flickered 3 times. Then I saw a gondola move. I couldn't see which one it was at first, but I could hear the cable shifting. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped outside, and aimed the beam up the slope. I caught the movement of a single gondola, gliding along the cable like it was powered. The rest of the gondolas stayed in place. I felt a surge of adrenaline, and my breath got shallow. I tried to stay calm. I told myself it might be some mechanical glitch, maybe a release on the cable. But that didn't explain the figure from the night before. I started up the slope again, this time moving faster. My legs burned from the incline. I slipped a few times on the ice. When I reached the tower, I looked up. I saw the same silhouette inside the gondola, looking down at me. The cabin rocked gently in the wind, but the figure stood still. I called out, "You're not supposed to be here, come down." I don't even know why I said that. I didn't have a plan for what to do if they responded, but they didn't say anything. I raised my flashlight and pointed it straight at the gondola. I strained my eyes, trying to see a face or any detail. It was just darkness. The figure's shape was a bit clearer, though. It looked like a tall person wearing a hood or maybe a heavy coat. I couldn't see arms moving. I couldn't see eyes. After a few seconds, the cabin rose again, just like before, then stopped. I tried to keep the light on it, but the gondola drifted behind the tower. When I moved to get a better angle, it was empty again. My heart was pounding, and my palms were sweaty despite the cold. I felt a tingling sensation in my fingers and a tightness in my neck. I checked the maintenance box again. It was still locked. No sign of forced entry. I circled around the tower, shining my flashlight under the platform. Nothing was there. No footprints in the patchy snow. I walked a few yards away and looked up again. The gondola hung in place, door closed. I trudged back down to the station, trying not to stumble on the icy path. When I got inside, I closed the door behind me, locked it, and stood by the control panel. I listened to the hum of the small space heater I keep under the desk. My clothes felt damp from sweat. I drank some water and tried to steady my breathing. The rest of the night was quiet. I felt like I was being watched, though. Every time I looked out the window, I expected to see that silhouette. But I saw nothing except the dim outline of the towers under the moonlight. By the third night, I was on edge the moment I arrived. My shift starts at 9 p.m., but I don't usually see anything until after 11. I spent the first 2 hours checking every electrical connection I could access. I used a flashlight to inspect wires, and I even opened the main breaker box. Everything looked normal. No tripped breakers, no signs of tampering. By 11, I was pacing around the station, waiting. My stomach felt knotted, and I noticed my hands shaking a bit. I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from nerves. At 11:10 p.m., the lights on the panel flickered for a split second. My heart skipped a beat. I went to the window. I saw the tower light flicker again. I grabbed the radio I keep on me and considered calling for backup from the security team, but I hesitated. I felt a stubborn need to see this through on my own. I stood outside, shining my flashlight up the lift line. It was dark at first, just the regular shape of the gondolas hanging on the cable. Then one of them shifted. It moved a few yards up the cable. The wind was strong, and I could hear the squeaking of the metal grips. I aimed the flashlight at the gondola, and that's when I saw the silhouette inside. It felt like it was looking right at me, though I couldn't make out any features. The door to the gondola swung open slightly. The figure didn't step out. It just stood there. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. I swallowed hard and said, "I see you." I don't know why I said that. I guess I wanted to make contact somehow. The gondola door slammed shut and the cabin slid a few more yards. The cables groaned. I watched it inch upward until it reached the tower. I expected it to stop like before, and it did for a moment. Then it moved again and disappeared behind the tower's structure. I rushed forward, climbing up the path, slipping on loose gravel. My knees felt weak. The wind stung my cheeks. By the time I got there, the gondola was empty again. The door was closed. I opened my mouth to call out, but I didn't have the energy. I checked around the tower with my flashlight. I found nothing. No footprints, no dropped items, no open panels. I stared at the gondola, trying to figure out how it could be moving without power. Then I noticed something new. The security light on the tower had a crack in the casing. I looked closer and saw the bulb flickering from a loose connection. I reached up and tried to tighten it, but the bracket was bent. I wondered if this was some short circuit messing with the system. But even a power surge wouldn't explain the silhouette. Now almost every night I see the gondola move on its own. Sometimes I hear a faint click from the control panel. Other times I hear the whir of the cable overhead. I always go outside to look. The silhouette is there about half the time. I still can't see details. It just stands in the gondola, not reacting, not speaking. If I approach, it always disappears by the time I get close. I feel like it's waiting for me to reach a certain point before it leaves. It's like it wants me to know it's there. These past few nights, my nerves have been shot. I don't sleep well during the day because I keep thinking about that shape in the gondola. I triple-check the power system every time I start my shift. Everything shows off, but the gondola keeps moving. I've considered the possibility that I'm hallucinating from lack of sleep, but I have pictures from my phone. They're blurry, but you can see the gondola in a different position than before. My job is to guard this place. I know the resort owners don't want to spend more money on security if they can avoid it. I'm supposed to handle this on my own, but I don't know how to handle something that isn't a normal intruder. I feel the presence every time I step outside at night. I hear small creaks on the cable or on the tower platforms. I sense the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, like someone is staring at me from above. Sometimes I walk around the entire station, shining my flashlight at the chairs, the support beams, and the locked doors. I don't find anything that explains how or why the system is turning on. I haven't found any secret wiring or hidden generators. Everything is normal, except for the fact that it won't stop happening. I'm not sure what else to do. I've left short notes in the logbook describing the flickering lights and the gondola's movement. I haven't mentioned the silhouette in detail because I don't want the owners to think I'm paranoid. But each night, it gets harder to pretend that it's just a mechanical error. Sometimes I stand in the station looking at the control panel, willing it to stay off. Then I hear that single click and feel my stomach twist. The flicker starts and I step outside, flashlight in hand, boots slipping on the cold ground. Every time, that presence is there, as if it's testing me or waiting for me to make a move. I don't know what it wants or how it's happening, but it's real. I see it. I feel it. And so far, I can't stop it. I can't. I started this job because I needed the money. I knew it would be dull most of the time. I knew it would be quiet. What I didn't expect were the noises at night, the lights flickering, the feeling that someone was always watching me. Right now, I'm working as a temporary archivist in a historical library downtown. They stuck me in an old annex filled with rare books and dusty manuscripts. It's a place few people visit, so I'm alone most of the time. At first I liked the silence, but after a few nights staying late, I noticed things that didn't make sense. I heard pages turning behind me. I came back from the bathroom and found books that should have been on the table shoved onto high shelves. Sometimes I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I don't believe in ghosts, but I can't explain what's happening. I keep telling myself it's the wind, or maybe I'm just tired. But deep down, I'm not so sure. I'm a 35-year-old guy, pretty average, not someone who scares easily. I'm used to working odd jobs, and I've done plenty of late shifts in different places. I've cleaned offices after hours, done security at a storage facility, that kind of thing. But this library is different. It's old. built in the early 1900s. The annex is in the back, separated from the main reading rooms by a long hallway with locked doors. There's a musty smell inside, like the air hasn't been circulated in decades. The floorboards creak. The shelves are heavy, made of dark wood. There's one narrow window near the ceiling that lets in a bit of light, but at night, it's almost pitch black unless I have the overheads on. My job is to catalog these rare books and manuscripts. I need to note every title, check its condition, and enter all the details into a computer system. The deadline is tight, so I often stay past midnight. Most of the time I'm sitting at a small wooden desk with a flickering old lamp. The overhead lights buzz and sometimes they shut off without warning. Maintenance says there's an electrical problem in that wing, but they haven't fixed it yet, so I rely on a flashlight when the lamps die. It's not ideal, but I deal with it because I need the paycheck. The first time I noticed something strange was 2 weeks ago. I was alone, as usual. It was about 1 in the morning. I had this large tome on the table. I remember it clearly because it was a thick volume with a cracked spine and gold lettering on the cover. I got up to grab a drink of water from a cooler in the corner. It took me maybe 30 seconds. When I turned back, the book was open. I hadn't opened it. I had left it closed because I didn't want to damage the spine any further. But there it was, open wide to some random page full of cramped handwriting. I stared at it for a few seconds. My skin prickled. The room felt colder. I couldn't see anyone else around and the door was still locked. I thought maybe I had just forgotten that I left it open. I shrugged it off and kept working. But that feeling stayed with me. It was like I wasn't alone anymore. A few nights later, the lights went out completely around midnight. The emergency light in the corridor turned on, casting this dim glow that barely reached my desk. I clicked on my flashlight and walked down the aisle of shelves, checking the fuse box near the door. While I was fiddling with switches, I heard this soft scraping sound. It reminded me of pages being turned, like someone flipping through a heavy book. I swung the flashlight in that direction. I saw nothing but shelves. The scraping stopped. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to keep calm. I looked around for a while, shining the light under tables, behind the stacks. I didn't see anyone. The lights came back about 10 minutes later. I tried to convince myself it was just some loose paper shifting in a draft, or maybe the building settling. But the sound was too distinct to forget. The scariest moment so far happened last week. I had to log some manuscripts that night, so I stayed until 2 in the morning. I placed a particular book, an old journal with a leather cover, on the table. I remember placing it square in the center of the table because it was fragile, and I didn't want it near the edge. Then I decided to use the restroom. I locked the annex door on my way out, like always, because we're not allowed to leave it open. When I came back a few minutes later, the journal wasn't on the table anymore. It was on a shelf about 7 feet off the ground. I'm not short, but I would need a ladder to reach that shelf. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. My hands got clammy. I felt my heart thumping in my ears. There's no way I moved it. There was no one else around. Everything else seemed in place, but that one book had moved. I picked up the ladder, got the journal down, and put it back on the table. Then I stood there just staring at it, wondering if I was losing my mind. I told one of the librarians about it the next day. She just gave me a bored look and said, maybe someone else came in while I was gone. But I have the only key besides security, and the security guy never patrols the annex without telling me. There are cameras in the main lobby, but apparently none in this old section because it's too expensive to wire. That means there's no footage of what happened. The librarian told me not to worry, that old buildings can do strange things and that sometimes people forget what they've done when they're tired. I didn't push it. I just wanted to finish my work and ignore whatever weird stuff was going on. Each night, though, something else happens. Sometimes it's small, a drawer that won't stay closed, a stack of papers on the floor when I know I left them on the shelf. Sometimes it's bigger, footsteps in the corridor or the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Last night, I heard a rhythmic tapping on one of the tables behind the shelves. It sounded like someone drumming their fingers on the wood. I called out, "Hello?" The tapping stopped. Then I heard a quick scuffle, like a chair being moved. I walked over with my flashlight. Nothing. The table and chair were still. No sign of anyone else. I hate the feeling I get afterward. My stomach churns. My mouth goes dry. I keep telling myself to focus on my job. I have a huge list of items to catalog, and the deadline is coming fast, but every little sound makes me jump. Every time I find a door open or a book out of place, I feel this chill in my spine. I've taken to double-checking the lock whenever I go to the bathroom or the break room. I even tried staying perfectly still one time, hiding behind a tall shelf, hoping to catch whoever was messing with me. But I heard nothing. I stayed there for about 10 minutes, crouched down, breathing as quietly as I could. My legs started to cramp, so I finally got up. The moment I stood, I heard a soft thump from the other side of the annex. I ran to check, but I found nothing. Just rows of books. The books themselves are interesting, but I don't have much time to read them. Most are old records, family histories, diaries, some official documents from city archives. Some are in languages I don't recognize. They have these thick covers, dusty pages, and a smell that lingers in my clothes. My hands feel grimy after handling them, so I wash them often. I'm supposed to organize them by category, but something keeps shifting them around. I'll spend hours putting them in order, only to find half of them in the wrong spots the next day. I asked if maybe some other staff member is coming in when I'm not there, but the main librarian said no one else has the authorization right now. It's just me. Last night, I decided to bring my own small camera to see if I could catch anything. It's not a fancy setup, just a cheap webcam hooked to my laptop. I positioned it to face the main aisle, turned off the overhead lights, and waited in the dark with my flashlight. It felt ridiculous. The only sounds were my own breathing and the slight hum from the emergency light in the corridor. After a while, I got restless. My eyes itched. I walked around, shining the flashlight on the spines of books, checking if anything looked out of place. Then I heard a rustling sound behind me. It was soft, like someone brushing against a shelf. I spun around. No one was there, but a book lay on the floor, its pages bent. I walked over and picked it up. The cover was blank. I flipped through it. It was some old medical ledger with entries from the 1930s. I had no idea why it was on the floor. I checked the camera, but the angle wasn't wide enough to see that corner. The footage showed me stepping away, then nothing but dark shapes. I felt annoyed at myself for not positioning it better. I put the book back, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I've tried telling myself it's all in my head. Maybe the building has weird airflow that can cause books to fall or doors to slam. Maybe I'm paranoid because I'm alone so much. But I can't explain that instance with the journal on the high shelf. I can't dismiss the times I've locked the door and still found things moved around. It feels like someone or something wants me to notice them. I've thought about quitting, but I need this job. The pay is higher than most of the temporary gigs I've found. Tonight, I showed up determined to power through. I got a big thermos of coffee and decided I'd work straight through to 3 out in the morning if I had to. I told myself I wouldn't let anything distract me. I started with a stack of manuscripts, typing up entries as fast as I could. After a couple of hours, I got lost in the routine. The annex was quiet except for my typing. Then, around 1:30, the lights flickered again. That familiar hum cut out. The overheads died. I sighed, reached for my flashlight, and waited for the emergency light to kick in. It blinked on a few seconds later, bathing the annex in dull orange light. I continued working by flashlight. My laptop's battery was still good for another hour. The silence felt heavier. The building seemed to press down on me. I thought I heard a rustle near the far shelves. My chest got tight. I tried to ignore it. Then I heard a clear, distinct cough. It sounded like a man clearing his throat. It came from about 10 feet behind me. I froze. My heart hammered. I swung around and shone the flashlight on the shelves. Nothing moved. The air felt colder. I called out, "Is anyone there?" No answer. I waited, listening for footsteps. The only sound was my own breathing. I walked toward that section, passing shelf after shelf. My hand felt sweaty around the flashlight. I kept scanning the floor and corners. No one. But I smelled something like old tobacco smoke, faint and sour. Suddenly, a book dropped from a high shelf. It slammed onto the floor with a dull thud. I let out a gasp. My pulse pounded in my head. I looked up. The shelf was about 8 feet off the ground. The book's spine was cracked. I stooped to pick it up, then heard a scraping sound behind me. I whipped around with the light. A tall rolling ladder stood there, slightly swaying. It had been locked against the wall earlier. Now it was in the middle of the aisle. I stepped back, feeling my knees go weak. I glanced at the door to make sure it was still closed. The bolt was still in place. I checked my pocket. My key was there. I decided I'd had enough for the night. I stuffed my laptop into my bag, grabbed my phone, and practically sprinted to the door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. My hands shook when I unlocked the door. I flicked off the flashlight and left the annex, making sure to lock it behind me. I didn't bother turning the power back on. I told the main desk guard that something felt off in the annex. He gave me a worried look, but didn't say much. I think he's heard similar complaints before. He just nodded and told me to go home and get some rest. I can't quit. I need this job. But every night I go back, I expect something else to happen. I might try different things. Set up more cameras, maybe record audio. I don't know if that will help. All I know is I keep finding books in strange places. I keep hearing noises. I keep seeing that shadow dart between the shelves. And no matter how many times I tell myself I'm imagining things, I can't ignore the feeling that something is there with me. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it's dangerous. All I can do is try to finish the cataloging before my contract is up. After that, I'm gone, and I'm never coming back to that annex again. But until then, I'll keep walking into that musty room every night, flashlight in hand, hoping that the next noise I hear is just the old pipes rattling. Because if it's not, I'm not sure I want to find out what's really in there. I got this job because I needed work and the pay was decent. I didn't ask many questions when they said it was a small colonial chapel far from town. I showed up expecting some dust and broken beams, maybe a few rodents. But on my first day, I realized something was off. There was a heaviness in the air that made my skin crawl. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just an old building, full of creaks and smells. But then things got weird, and I couldn't ignore the tension anymore. I'm here to assist with the general renovation. My main task is to clean out the basement and discard any broken furniture or debris. The place has been closed for decades. Nobody seems to know much about its history, and the people who hired me didn't share any details. They gave me keys, pointed to the tools, and told me to get started. On my first morning, I lugged a bucket, some brushes, a flashlight, and a toolbox down to the basement. The stairs creaked under my feet. The boards were warped, and dust floated in the stale air. When I stepped off the last stair, I smelled damp earth. There was also a faint odor that I couldn't place, something stale and unpleasant. It wasn't strong, but it made me wrinkle my nose. I saw stacks of old boxes, piles of rotted wood, and a few broken benches pushed against the walls. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling. I heard dripping from somewhere in the corner, probably a leaky pipe. I put on my gloves and started clearing a path. After a while, I got used to the dim light and the smell. I worked on moving the heaviest debris first. When I lifted a rotten plank, something skittered across the floor. I only caught a glimpse of it. Might have been a rat or a large bug. I didn't think much of it at the time. About 30 minutes in, I noticed a sudden draft. It felt like a burst of cold air brushing against my neck. I stopped moving and listened. Everything was quiet. I stood still, holding my breath. Then I heard something that sounded like footsteps shuffling a few yards away. It was faint, but it was there. I aimed my flashlight at the far side of the basement. The beam showed boxes and shadows, but nothing else. I took a few cautious steps forward and crouched down. The dust on the floor showed fresh marks like someone had walked through it. I saw a line of prints that led around a stack of crates. I followed them. They stopped at a corner where there was a small door I hadn't noticed before. It was low, maybe up to my waist, and it had a rusty handle. It was cracked open by an inch or two. I felt a chill then. My heart beat harder. I wasn't sure why I was so uneasy, but the silence felt different now. I crouched down and reached for the handle. When I tried to open that door, something yanked it back from the inside. The door slammed shut against my hand. My pulse pounded in my ears. I jumped back. My knees felt weak. I dropped the flashlight for a second and cursed. I picked it up and shone the light again at the door, but it was closed tight. It didn't move or rattle anymore. I backed away slowly, trying not to make noise. Then I rushed upstairs, 2 steps at a time. I stood there in the chapel's main hall, breathing fast. My shirt was soaked with sweat and my hands were shaking. I thought about telling the foreman, but I didn't. I was new and I didn't want to sound paranoid. Maybe it was a draft or something else. But I knew I hadn't imagined that pull. I decided to lock the basement door for now and work upstairs for the rest of the day. I spent the afternoon scraping old paint off the walls and sanding rough spots near the altar. The entire time I kept glancing at the heavy door that led downstairs. I couldn't get my mind off the strange tug from behind that little door in the basement. When my shift was over, I left as quickly as I could. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about those footprints in the dust. I got up the next morning telling myself to handle things differently. I would go back down, maybe try to open the little door again, but in a safer, more careful way. I arrived early. The chapel was quiet, and the sun was barely up. I walked around outside first, checking the foundation. The walls were thick, made of old stone. There didn't seem to be any obvious openings near the basement area. After a while, I went inside, took a deep breath, and opened the door to the basement. The steps groaned under my boots as I descended. The air felt stuffy again, and I smelled that musty odor mixed with damp soil. I flicked on my flashlight. Everything was where I left it, except one detail. Some of my tools had moved. My wrench was on a different shelf. One of my brushes was on top of a box instead of inside the bucket. It wasn't a big deal, but it felt wrong. I never place my tools randomly like that. I keep them organized because it saves me time. I checked the corner where I had found the little door. It was still there, closed. There were no new footprints on the floor. The only marks were my own from the day before. I stood there, my breathing unsteady, staring at that door. I felt a surge of anxiety and decided to focus on cleaning and ignore it for now. By midday, I had removed half the debris. I tried not to think about anything odd, but as I swept the floor, I kept feeling a presence behind me. Each time I spun around, there was nothing except the flickering shadows cast by my flashlight. The hair on my neck stood up. My stomach tightened. My palms got sweaty even though it was cold. I heard faint creaks overhead, but the chapel was empty except for me. The rest of the workers were due the next day. I hated being alone there, but the job was the job. So I kept going, determined to finish. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard a low scraping sound behind a stack of boxes. I turned and saw one of the boxes shift a few inches, then stop. I froze. My thoughts raced. I gripped a crowbar in one hand. I inched closer, calling out to see if maybe an animal was back there. I said something like, "Is anyone here?" My voice came out shaky. No answer. I slid one box aside and found nothing but the damp floor. A small puddle of water had formed near the stone wall. No sign of mice or rats, no sign of anything. I felt my throat tighten. My heart beat so fast it almost hurt. I decided I'd had enough for one day. When I locked up that evening, I made sure the basement door was secured with the padlock. I locked the main doors of the chapel too. Then I drove home. My head was throbbing, and I just wanted to forget about that place. But around midnight, I got a call from the foreman. He told me an old bell at the top of the chapel started ringing out of nowhere. Some local resident heard it and got spooked. The chapel's bell is rusty and has no rope attached. It's been that way for years. It's not even supposed to work. Yet someone or something rang it. The foreman wanted to know if I had gone back. I told him I hadn't. He sounded annoyed and said we'd discuss it in the morning. The next day, I arrived even earlier, feeling uneasy. The foreman was there along with a couple of other workers. They were checking the bell tower for any signs of entry. Nothing was disturbed. The lock on the tower door was still in place. The foreman grilled me with questions. He implied maybe I was messing around. I denied it. I told him I locked up properly. He said we should keep going with the renovations, but be mindful. That was his only comment. Then he left me alone to handle the basement again. I carried on, but I felt eyes on me the whole time. Every step I took sounded too loud in that cramped space. My breath was shallow, and I kept my flashlight close by. My tasks were routine: scraping old paint off benches, piling up broken chair legs, clearing out rotted floorboards. But I was jumpy. Any small noise made me twitch. I stopped 2 or 3 times, certain I heard footsteps, only to find nothing. I felt trapped, stuck in a basement that seemed to have its own pulse. My throat stayed dry even though the air was damp. I felt sweat on my temples, and I wiped my face on my sleeve a lot. The day dragged on like that. After lunch, the foreman told me to examine a section of wall near the back. There were signs of water damage, and he wanted me to check if it needed a patch or a full replacement. When I walked to that area, I noticed the small door again. This time, it was slightly open. My pulse kicked into overdrive. I wanted to run up the stairs and never come back down, but I had a job to do. I knelt and touched the door gently. It swung open with a creak. My flashlight beam showed a cramped crawl space with dirt walls. I saw old bricks and loose stones. There was a smell of wet earth. I didn't see anything moving in there, but my entire body felt tense. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped the flashlight. I forced myself to peek inside. It looked like it went back a few feet, then curved to the right. It was too tight for me to squeeze through comfortably. I noticed footprints in the dirt, but they weren't mine. The shape was different, almost like a small dress shoe or something similar. My mind raced. I whispered, "Hello?" No response. I waited a few seconds, my ears straining to catch any sound. I heard nothing. I couldn't explain the footprints, and I didn't see any reason for them to be there. I decided to shut the door and try to forget about it, but my hand wouldn't stop shaking. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my chest. That night I stayed late because I wanted to finish up my tasks and avoid coming back the next morning. I was tired of feeling watched. I was tired of being afraid. Around 7 in the evening, the light outside was fading. I was alone. I had a small lamp hooked up to an extension cord for some extra light. I kept hearing soft thuds above me. It sounded like someone walking around the main hall. I called out, but nobody answered. I went upstairs, checked the entire area, and found it empty. Then I heard a louder sound from below, like a box shifting. I hurried back down, worried that I might have knocked something over. But everything looked the same. I looked at the corner with the small door. It was closed. I stared at it for a good minute. Nothing moved. My nerves were shot. My neck hurt from tension. My eyes were dry from constantly scanning the room. I decided enough was enough. I packed my tools, turned off the lamp, and locked the basement door behind me. While I was locking it, I heard a dull scraping noise from the other side, but I didn't linger to investigate. My hands fumbled with the keys, and I nearly dropped them. I walked outside, locked the main doors, and got in my truck. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I told myself not to come back alone anymore. If the foreman wanted me here, he could schedule more workers. But the next day, the foreman told me we were behind schedule. He insisted I come back to finish the basement cleanup. He said the rest of the crew was busy with the roof and the outside walls. I tried to protest, but it didn't change anything. So I spent another day down there, always feeling like I wasn't alone. Tools went missing, only to show up in weird places. I'd find my flashlight on a crate across the room when I was sure I had left it on top of my toolbox. My broom went missing for half an hour. I found it leaning against the small door, bristles pointed at the opening. I swear I didn't put it there. My stomach felt knotted, and I had to force myself to keep working. I stopped checking the time because it moved so slowly that it drove me crazy. On one of the last days, I tried to ignore every strange sound. I blocked out the footsteps, the creaks, the sense of someone standing right behind me. I focused on clearing the debris and stacking old boxes for disposal. By the afternoon, I had most of the space cleared. Then the light bulb in my work lamp flickered and went out. I cursed and grabbed my flashlight. The darkness pressed in on me from every side. I bumped into a bench, scraping my knee. Then I heard a whisper. It sounded close to my ear. I couldn't understand the words, but it made my hair stand on end. My head snapped around. The beam of light caught only the damp stone wall and cobwebs. My breath came in short bursts. My heart thudded. I felt sweat trickle down my neck. I ran. I ran up the stairs, slammed the basement door, and tossed my tools on the floor of the chapel's main hall. My chest heaved. I locked the basement door behind me and just stood there, breathing fast. My muscles felt weak. I grabbed my gear and hurried out of the chapel without turning off the lights. I didn't care. I wanted out. I climbed into my truck and drove away. I didn't look back. That was the last day I spent working alone in that place. Every time I think about the basement, I feel my heart race. I don't know what's in there, but I'm sure I wasn't alone. There's something lingering in that chapel, something that doesn't like being disturbed. The footprints, the moved tools, and the strange noises all point to that conclusion. I never got any solid explanations. The foreman avoided the topic, and the crew that came after me kept their distance from the basement. I did my job, but I left a chunk of my peace of mind in that dark, damp space. Even now, if I close my eyes, I still see that half-open door, and I still feel that sudden pull, yanking it from the inside. It's burned into my memory, and I'm not sure I'll ever forget it. I still remember the cold air on my face that first night I volunteered as a night watchman at the old station. The manager at the Historical Society handed me a flashlight and a ring of keys, then wished me luck with a half smile. I stepped onto the platform around 9 at night, feeling a slight chill. The place was silent except for my footsteps on the concrete. The overhead lights were dim, and I could see the old ticket booth off to my left through a glass window. It looked worn out and coated in dust. The bench by the entrance was missing a plank on one end. The walls had chipped paint, and the floor had a few stains from spilled drinks or rainwater that seeped in over the years. The air smelled a little musty, like nobody had opened those doors in a long time. I walked along the platform, shining my flashlight at the corners where I thought someone might hide. My main job was to make sure no one snuck in to vandalize or steal anything. I had never seen much action in the area, but I wanted to be thorough. The station was big enough for people to slip in if I wasn't careful. The track area looked abandoned. The rails were rusty and barely visible in the darkness, except when the moonlight hit them just right. I kept hearing little sounds like the wind moving through broken windows or scraping against the old roof. I wasn't scared, but I was jumpy. Being alone in a place that once held crowds of commuters felt strange. My shift usually started at 8 and ended around sunrise. There was a small office inside the station where I could sit and watch the monitors that connected to a few security cameras. Most of those cameras pointed to the platform and the old waiting area. There was another that showed the ticket booth and a little hallway that led to some restrooms. The resolution wasn't great, so if I saw movement, I would go check it out myself. That was the agreement I had with the society. No fancy modern systems, just me, a few cameras, and the occasional walk around the perimeter. On my third night, something happened that made me question everything. It was around midnight. I had decided to step outside and walk the length of the platform. I remember feeling the cool breeze on the back of my neck and pulling my jacket collar up. The moon was out, and it illuminated parts of the rails in a pale glow. I looked in the direction of the old signals, which were rusted and missing their covers. Then I heard a faint shuffle, like a footstep on concrete. I spun around, aiming my flashlight toward the far end of the platform. At first, I saw nothing. I stepped forward a few feet. The wind made the old station sign creak overhead. Then I caught sight of a figure about 30 feet away, near one of the large pillars that held up the roof. The person was standing with his back to me, facing the tracks. He wore a dark coat and I thought he had a hat on, but I couldn't be sure. I called out, "Hey, you're not supposed to be here. This property is closed at night." My voice echoed a little. The man didn't turn around. He just stood there, gazing forward like he was waiting for something. I started walking toward him, shining my flashlight on the ground to avoid tripping. I called out again, "Sir, you can't be here. How did you get in?" He still didn't move. My heart rate picked up, but I tried to stay calm. When I was about 10 feet away, I heard him shift his feet. There was a quick scraping sound, like shoes dragging on rough concrete. Then he moved forward 2 steps and vanished into the shadows near the tracks. I reached that spot in maybe 3 seconds, but there was nobody there. I looked down the tracks, trying to see if he had jumped down or run off. There was no movement, and I didn't hear any footsteps. I felt a chill run along my arms. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I paced around the spot, shining my flashlight in every direction. The platform was empty. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves behind the station and the distant hum of cars passing on a nearby road. I didn't see footprints or any indication that someone had been there. My flashlight beam cut across the tracks, revealing rust and debris, but no sign of a person. I even stepped off the platform, crouched, and looked underneath it. Nothing. I went back to the office and reviewed the camera footage. The camera that pointed to that part of the platform showed me walking, shining my flashlight. But I saw no other figure. It was just me, turning my head back and forth, calling out to someone who apparently wasn't there. I felt a tightness in my chest. I wondered if my eyes had played tricks on me. I told myself that maybe it was a trick of the light or my nerves acting up. But something about the experience felt too real. I could still remember the distinct sound of that person's footsteps. I could picture the shape of the coat, the way he stood and the way he moved. It didn't feel like a hallucination. Over the next few nights, small things started bothering me. I'd be sitting in the office and I would hear faint noises that sounded like train doors opening or closing. Other times I'd think I heard the squeak of wheels on a track. But there was no train out there. The station had been closed for years. The next time I walked along the platform, I heard a faint clank, like metal against metal. It wasn't super loud, but it echoed. I checked around for loose hardware or wind banging something against a beam, but everything looked in place. One night, a week after I saw that figure, I was doing my usual patrol around 1 in the morning. The sky was cloudy, so the moon wasn't bright. The platform lights were faint, casting weak pools of light at intervals. I made my way to the far end, near an old vending machine. The machine was empty with a busted glass front, so no reason for anyone to be messing with it. I heard a rustling sound near a pile of stacked chairs that the Historical Society had left behind. I angled my flashlight and saw nothing but those chairs leaning against the wall. Then I heard a scrape behind me near the edge of the platform. I turned fast, and I saw him again. He was about 10 feet away, walking slowly toward the spot where the tracks met a service road. It was the same shape. Dark coat facing away from me. I yelled, "Hold on!" and I bolted in his direction. By the time I got to that stretch of concrete, he was gone. I felt the same chill in my arms as before. My stomach tightened and I felt a light sweat on my forehead despite the cool night air. I scanned the area with my flashlight. There was no place to hide except a few old crates and a locked gate that led to some maintenance area. I checked the gate. It was still locked. Nobody could have passed through without me hearing. I peered down into the empty track bed and saw nothing but darkness and a couple of rocks. I called out again, just in case. No response. I headed back to the office and sat down, breathing hard. My heartbeat felt too fast. I checked the cameras. Just like before, it showed me running, turning my head, but no sign of a second person. I felt uneasy. My skin tingled, and I kept replaying the sound of his footsteps in my mind. It was a definite noise, not something random like a breeze. I couldn't figure out why it never showed on the footage. That bothered me more than anything. If there was some intruder, I wanted evidence, but I saw nothing. Over the next few weeks, I kept hearing sounds that reminded me of a train arriving. It was subtle. A faint hiss, a click, or something that sounded like an engine far in the distance. Once, I heard a door slam, like an old train car door, and it made me jump in my seat. When I ran outside, I just found the empty platform. Another time, I heard footsteps in the main hallway, so I sprinted there, only to find it empty. I can handle the idea of a trespasser, but I don't like feeling that I'm chasing a ghost. One night around 2 in the morning, I was standing near the ticket window checking the lock on the door. I thought I heard a whisper behind me, and I turned to see the shadow of someone near the far corner. My flashlight was off at that moment because I was using my phone's screen for a second. As soon as I switched on my flashlight, the corner was empty. My scalp tingled and I felt a twist in my gut. The building itself seemed too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Sometimes, while I walked the perimeter, I got the strange feeling I wasn't alone. I'd catch a glimpse of a shape down at the far end of the tracks, but it would disappear when I blinked or turned my head. At the same time, the routine tasks stayed the same. I still checked all the doors, locked the side entrances, and tried to make sure no windows were broken. I saw no sign of forced entry or missing items. Nobody spray-painted the walls or knocked over anything. The place was as empty as ever. Yet every time I thought about that figure in the dark coat, I felt a tingling sensation in my arms and a slight ache in my chest. On another quiet night, I decided to sit in the waiting area for a while. There were still a few rows of old seats bolted to the floor. The air was stale and dust floated in front of the flickering ceiling lights. I listened carefully, hoping to catch any sound. After half an hour, I heard the faint rumble of what sounded like an approaching locomotive. It was distant, but it was there. My eyes widened, and I stood up. My mind raced. I knew no train had run on these tracks for years. I moved toward the double doors that led to the platform. My palms were sweaty. I felt tension in my shoulders. When I stepped outside, the rumble stopped. Everything was silent. I looked at the rails, shining my flashlight on the rusty metal. Nothing. No lights, no movement, no train. I exhaled and realized my hands were shaking. I forced myself to walk along the platform again, hoping I'd find some logical explanation. After several minutes, I saw a shape at the far end, near the old signal tower. It was him again. I could see the outline of a tall man with a coat. He took a slow step and disappeared behind the tower wall. I sprinted with everything I had, covering the distance in under 30 seconds. When I got there, the area was deserted. The tower door was locked and the perimeter fence was intact. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. My breathing was loud in my ears. My chest hurt from the run. I felt beads of sweat rolling down my temples. After that, my nights at the station followed the same pattern. Long stretches of silence broken by strange noises or glimpses of that same figure. Sometimes I heard the squeak of what sounded like brakes. Sometimes I heard the faint chatter of voices like passengers boarding a train. It was never clear, more like a distant murmur. When I checked the cameras, I only saw myself or an empty platform. I started to question my own sanity, but I knew I was experiencing something real to me. I could feel the cold prickle on my arms whenever I sensed him around. I told the manager at the Historical Society about these occurrences. He just shrugged. He said other night volunteers had reported weird sounds now and then, but nobody had filed an official complaint. He joked that old buildings have their share of creaks and drafts. I didn't argue. I tried to stay calm and professional, but it was hard. Every time I walked that platform, I could almost feel a presence. I heard faint footsteps, saw a blur of movement, and sensed that someone was there with me. It was never threatening, but it was unsettling. My body would tense up and I'd clench my flashlight. My breath would catch in my throat. Sometimes I'd mutter to myself, trying to keep my nerves steady. One night, around 3 in the morning, I was checking a side corridor near the restrooms. The lights in that part of the station were almost out. I clicked on my flashlight and saw a shadow at the end of the hallway, near a locked door. I felt a spike of adrenaline and moved forward carefully. My footsteps were loud on the dusty floor. The shadow slid out of sight, and I thought I heard a distant clang like a gate closing. By the time I reached that door, there was no one there. I tried the handle, Locked. Like always. My legs felt shaky. My hand trembled as I gripped the flashlight. I admit I started to dread going there at night, but I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Then, on one of my last nights, I had an experience that cemented my belief that something strange was happening. It was a quiet shift, with no unusual sounds for hours. Around 4 in the morning, I decided to do one more lap before finishing. I walked out onto the platform. The air felt heavy and I noticed a low fog creeping over the tracks. I swept my flashlight across the rails. A faint shape flickered near the center of the track bed, but I couldn't make it out. Then from behind me, I heard the clear, unmistakable sound of a train door sliding open. It was so loud that my breath caught, and my heartbeat thumped in my ears. I spun around, shining the flashlight. Nothing. I walked toward the origin of the sound, stepping carefully on the concrete. My boots made soft thuds. My ears strained for any hint of movement. That's when I saw him again, standing right at the edge of the platform, facing the empty rails. I froze. My pulse pounded. He didn't move or react. I said, "What do you want?" My voice came out shaky. He lifted one foot as though stepping onto a stair. Then everything went dark for a split second. The platform lights flickered. When they came back on, he was gone. I rushed to the spot and aimed my flashlight down onto the tracks. Nobody was there. The fog swirled around the rails. My hands were sweaty and my chest felt tight. Since then, I haven't been able to shake the feeling that on certain nights that station comes alive for him. Sometimes I step outside, and I swear I hear the distant rumble of an engine or the soft clatter of wheels. Other times I pick up faint voices like people talking in hushed tones, but I can't make out the words. It never lasts long, and it always leaves me feeling unsettled. I don't talk about it much. When people ask how my shift went, I usually say quiet night, unless they push for details. If I start explaining what I've seen, they give me strange looks, or they think I'm trying to spook them. I still do my rounds, checking for broken windows or graffiti. I check the cameras and everything looks normal, but deep down I know something's off. That old station doesn't feel abandoned on those nights when I catch him out of the corner of my eye. I can't prove it and I can't make it stop. I just keep showing up, patrolling the empty platform, trying not to let my imagination run wild. But every so often, I catch the sound of footsteps behind me, or I see a silhouette moving along the edge of the building. When I chase after it, I find nothing. I've told myself maybe there's a logical reason. Maybe there's an old audio system that's malfunctioning or some trick of the acoustics. But none of that explains why I keep seeing that man in the dark coat, or why he always seems just out of reach. I can't explain how he can vanish in the blink of an eye. No matter how hard I try to dismiss it, I can't forget the feeling of his presence. It's been going on for months now, and I don't know when it will stop. I still volunteer there, mostly because I feel responsible for the place. The idea of leaving it to someone else makes me uneasy. If someone else saw him, would they handle it better? Would they just ignore it? I don't know. All I know is that when I stand on that deserted platform and hear the faint echo of doors sliding open, I get a chill in my gut. My flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, but there's no one there, and the station stands empty and silent. Yet sometimes it doesn't feel empty at all. So that's it. That's the story of my nights at the station. I've tried to find ways to prove what I see, but nothing shows up on the cameras. I've tried to invite a friend to stay with me on a shift, but scheduling never worked out. Maybe I'm alone in this, or maybe the station only shows itself like this when I'm by myself. All I can say is, I've seen things I can't explain. I still do my job, locking doors, scanning the monitors, and walking the platform. But in the back of my mind, I wait for the faint sound of a train that isn't there, and I watch for that lone figure standing in the moonlight, staring at the tracks like he's waiting for a ride. If I see him again, I'll approach, but I know he'll be gone the second I get close, and I'm left with a racing heart and an empty stretch of concrete. That's how things go around here. I found that old rotary phone at a small thrift shop near my office. I walked in that day without a plan. I just wanted to see if they had a neat picture frame or some vintage bookends. The place was dim, smelled like old fabric, and had shelves stacked with random items. I saw the phone on a wooden table in the corner. Its metal parts were scratched. The black plastic was chipped in a few spots. The dial still spun when I tested it with my finger. I knew it wouldn't work as an actual phone these days. It was just a decorative piece to put on my desk. I liked the way it looked. It reminded me of those old detective movies. I bought it for a few bucks. The clerk put it in a paper bag, and I brought it straight to my office. I run a small marketing business on the second floor of a simple building. My office has 2 rooms. The front room is for my assistant, and the back room is mine. I spend a lot of time in there on my computer, working with graphics and ad campaigns. I wanted some vintage items around me to give the place a bit of personality. I placed the phone on a low cabinet beside my desk. There was no phone line to plug it into. I knew it wouldn't ring. It was purely for decoration. It sat there for weeks. Sometimes clients would notice it and make a comment. I would tell them it was just an old prop. Nothing special happened during that time. One night there was a heavy storm outside. Rain pounded on the windows. The thunder made the glass tremble. My assistant had gone home. I had stayed to finish some client reports. I was focused on the screen. My ears were half tuned to the rainfall outside. The power flickered once but stayed on. I remember feeling a bit uneasy. The wind was howling and I heard branches scraping the building. Around 8 p.m., I got up to stretch. I walked to the window to look at the street below. It was dark. The street lamps were on, but the rain was so thick I could barely see the parked cars. Then I heard a ring. It was a classic rotary phone ring, the kind you hear in old movies. I turned my head, thinking I had imagined it. The ring sounded a second time coming from the old phone on the cabinet. My heartbeat quickened. That phone wasn't connected to anything. There was no line. There was no power cord. It was just an empty shell, but it rang a third time. The sound was loud and clear. I stood there staring at it. My hands felt cold. My neck felt tense. I walked over to the phone. It rang again. I lifted the receiver to stop the ringing. I pressed the receiver against my ear. I heard static, soft and crackling. Then a voice. It was low and raspy. I couldn't identify the words at first. Then I heard my name. Daniel. It was spoken like a whisper. My stomach clenched. I felt sweat on my palms. I thought it was some kind of trick or maybe an electrical short, but I heard it again, clearer this time. Daniel, help me. I didn't recognize the voice. It sounded distant and weak. My breathing got shallow. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. All I managed to say was, "Who is this?" More static. Then the voice spoke again. "Help me. I'm stuck." I asked where they were. There was no answer, only crackling. Then the line went dead. I stood there in silence. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. My mind was racing. I checked the phone cord. It wasn't attached to anything. It was just lying on the cabinet. I tried to dial a number on the rotary disc, but obviously it didn't do anything. I felt a chill in the room even though the building's heat was on. I checked my watch. It was only 8:15 p.m. I looked around, half expecting someone to jump out of the closet. But I was alone. The storm continued outside. Thunder rumbled. I put the receiver back on the cradle. I waited a few minutes, just standing there listening to the wind. Nothing else happened. I packed up my things and locked the office. I felt uneasy, but I tried to convince myself it was some weird electrical phenomenon, or maybe stress. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about the call. I replayed the voice in my head. It had said my name. No one else had access to that phone. I wondered if someone set up a prank. The next morning, I examined the phone in daylight. I opened the bottom panel. The old wiring was there, but it was dusty and obviously not modified. I felt a knot in my stomach just looking at it. It felt wrong to keep it, but I left it where it was. I told myself it wouldn't ring again. There was no logical reason it could ring. Still, I couldn't forget the tension I felt during that moment. Over the next few days, I avoided staying late. I left the office by 6 p.m. I left the phone alone. Whenever I looked at it, I had a sense of dread, like I was waiting for it to ring. It sat there silent. My assistant didn't notice anything strange. She dusted it once, but said nothing. I wanted to tell her about the ring, but I was afraid she'd think I was imagining things. By Friday, I started to relax. Maybe it was just some freak occurrence caused by the storm. Maybe the thunder caused some electrical charge that made the bell ring. I tried to explain it that way. It wasn't a great explanation, but it was enough to keep me calm. That weekend, another storm rolled in. Heavy rain again. I decided to check on the office Saturday evening to make sure there was no leak near the windows. I got there around 7 p.m. I walked into my room. The phone was still on the cabinet. I stared at it for a moment, remembering what happened. The lights flickered. The wind was strong outside. I pulled a small flashlight out of my desk drawer just in case the power went out. Then I heard the ring again. It made me jump. My heart started pounding. I froze and stared at the phone. It rang a second time. My throat felt tight. I walked slowly toward it. The ring was clear. It was the same old-fashioned sound. I picked up the receiver. I heard static again. This time, the voice came through more clearly. "Daniel, can you hear me?" I paused. My mind was screaming at me to hang up, but I said, "I hear you. Who is this?" The voice coughed. It sounded like a person struggling to speak. Then they said, "Please help me. I'm stuck. It's cold. I can't see anything." I felt sweat dripping down my forehead. I asked where they were. They just repeated, "I'm stuck. It's dark." I gripped the receiver until my knuckles hurt. I asked, "What do you want me to do?" "I don't understand." The voice kept asking for help, repeating my name. Then there was a crackle. The line went silent. I stood there, breathing hard. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I put the phone down and paced around the office. My hands were shaking. I felt lightheaded. This wasn't possible. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the clerk at the thrift shop. I had her number because I sometimes donated old clothes there. She answered, and I asked if she knew anything about the phone. She said she didn't. She said it was in a box of random donations. She had no information about the previous owner. I thanked her and hung up. My voice was trembling during that call. I didn't know what else to do. I decided to open the phone again. I used a small screwdriver and took off the bottom panel. I inspected every wire. It was all standard old phone wiring. There was no hidden power source. Nothing. The phone was just a simple device from decades ago. I felt scared to leave it in my office. I thought about throwing it away, but I also felt strange about that. What if this wasn't just a random event? What if there was a reason for these calls? I couldn't explain it, but I felt a pull, like I needed to figure this out. I unplugged every power cable in my office. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and took the phone home with me. I placed it in my living room on a wooden side table. I sat on my couch staring at it, waiting for it to ring. It didn't ring that night, even though the storm continued. I barely slept. I kept jolting awake, expecting the sound of that old bell. Over the next few days, life went on. My work kept me busy. The phone stayed in my apartment. It didn't ring at all. I started to think maybe I had broken the strange connection by removing it from the office. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my chest. One night while I was making dinner, I heard it ring in the living room. I almost dropped the pan I was holding. I rushed over to the phone. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I picked up the receiver, my hands shaking. The voice came through again, faint and strained. "Daniel, it's cold. I'm stuck. Why won't you help me?" I asked. "Where are you? What do you need me to do?" The voice breathed heavily. I heard what sounded like scraping, like something dragging across a rough surface. Then they said, "Please get me out. I don't want to be here anymore." I kept asking for details, but the voice just repeated the same phrases. Then static swallowed the call, and it ended. I slammed the receiver down and stepped back. My heart was thumping against my ribs. I had no clue how to respond. The voice never gave me a location. They never explained who they were. Yet they clearly knew my name. I spent the rest of the evening pacing around my apartment. I checked the phone's cord again. It wasn't plugged into anything. I turned on the TV just to create some background noise. My mind was racing with questions. I felt an urge to destroy the phone, but I was afraid something worse might happen if I did. The next morning, I took the phone to a friend of mine who repairs electronics. I didn't tell him the whole story. I just asked him to check if there was any hidden mechanism inside. He opened it up and said it was just an old phone. Wires, a bell, nothing unusual. No transmitter, no battery, no modifications. I left his shop even more unsettled. That night, there was a break in the weather. The sky was clear, the moon was out. I was at home staring at the phone, waiting. Part of me wanted it to ring so I could try to get more information. Another part of me dreaded the sound. Around 10 p.m., and the phone rang again. I jumped off my chair, walked over, and lifted the receiver. This time, the voice was weaker. It sounded like they were losing strength. "Daniel, please help me. I'm so tired." I felt a lump in my throat. I told them I didn't know how to help. They just repeated, "Don't leave me here." I asked them who they were. The voice coughed. Then I heard, "I don't know." That scared me even more. I had no idea what was going on. The static grew louder. The call ended. For the next hour, I sat on the couch staring at the phone. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I checked the clock constantly. Nothing else happened that night. By midnight, I was exhausted. My eyes felt heavy, but my nerves were on edge. I tried to sleep. I kept waking up, listening for any sound. Morning came and I felt drained. I left the phone on the side table. I went to work and tried to act normal. A few days have passed since then. The phone hasn't rung again. It's sitting in my apartment, silent. I look at it every morning, half expecting it to ring. I don't have a new explanation. I don't know who that voice belonged to or why it was calling me. The memory of that raspy tone repeating my name still makes my chest feel tight. Whenever I glance at the phone, I think about the calls. The voice wanted help. I had no way to give it. I felt helpless and unnerved. I sometimes wonder if the phone will ring again. I worry it might happen when I'm asleep or when I'm away. I don't know what I'll do if it starts asking for help again. Part of me wants to throw it away, but I keep hesitating. I remember how desperate that voice sounded. If it calls again, I'll pick up. I'll try to find out more. That's all I can do right now. So far, there's only silence, but I stay alert for the ring that shouldn't be possible. It feels like a waiting game. And I don't know if I want an answer or if I just want it to end. I never thought moving to a small condo near downtown would lead me into something that kept me awake every night. I just wanted a simpler commute and fewer hassles with traffic. I found a decent place, signed the lease, and settled in. The building wasn't fancy, but it felt calm enough. At first, everyone seemed polite, minding their own business, which was exactly what I wanted. I had no idea that the man living next door would make me question my safety in my own home. My name is David, and I moved into apartment 303 about 6 weeks ago. When I first toured the place, the landlord told me it was a quiet building and mostly filled with young professionals who worked downtown. That was all I needed to hear. I work as a tech support agent, and the stress of driving for over an hour every day was wearing me down. I figured this new condo would be the perfect fix. During my first week, I barely saw anybody. It was a small complex, maybe 10 units in total. People seemed to come and go, sometimes waving hello, sometimes offering a short nod. I was fine with that. I'm not the type to strike up a conversation in the hallway. I prefer to keep to myself. Still, I noticed one thing right away. The guy in apartment 304 was different. I'd pass by his door and hear sounds that I couldn't quite explain. Sometimes it was loud talking, but it was always the same voice. At first I assumed he had visitors, but I never heard any other person respond to him. He'd carry on full arguments, shouting back and forth, but it was definitely just him. I tried not to pay too much attention. It felt rude to eavesdrop. One night, about 2 weeks after I moved in, I got home around 10 p.m. It was a typical late shift. I walked down the hallway and I saw him pacing near his door. He was sweating and muttering something I couldn't understand. I thought maybe he needed help, so I slowed down. When he saw me, he started talking in a fast, jumbled way. He said something like, "They're watching me, but you know that, don't you?" Then, without giving me time to answer, he told me not to come near him. He shouted that I was trying to trap him. Then he stopped, blinked a few times, and lowered his head. When he looked up again, his entire expression had changed. He spoke quietly with a calmer tone, saying, "You don't belong here. You can't stay." I remember my stomach clenching, my hands felt cold. I didn't know how to respond. Then he darted inside his apartment and slammed the door. I stood there for a second, unsure of what just happened. My mind was racing, and I felt my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I decided to go inside my own apartment and lock up. I tried to shake it off. I told myself he was probably just having a bad day or maybe dealing with something psychological. Either way, I felt uneasy. That night, I couldn't sleep well. I woke up around 3 a.m. to loud thumping sounds coming from next door. It sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor, combined with heavy footsteps. There was also a weird, choking laughter. It wasn't hysterical, but it was deep and echoing. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I wanted to knock on the wall and tell him to stop, but something about that laugh froze me. I just lay in bed, feeling my pulse in my neck, waiting for it to end. The next morning I got up exhausted. I considered talking to the landlord. I wasn't sure how to describe it without sounding dramatic. People have their own problems, and I don't like intruding. Yet the noise was impossible to ignore. By the time I showered and got dressed, I had made up my mind to say something if it happened again. That day, I also realized the corridor walls were thin. I could hear his door opening and closing several times. When I left for work, I saw fresh scuff marks on the wall outside his unit. It looked like something heavy had been dragged against it. I didn't see him in the hallway, so I just kept walking. Things were quiet that night until around midnight. I was watching TV in the living room when I heard a series of loud bangs against the wall I shared with him. Each thud shook the frame of a picture hanging there. I turned off the TV to listen more closely. In between the thuds, he was talking, but in two distinct voices. One was higher pitched, almost whining. The other was deeper, more aggressive. At times he shouted at someone, and then he answered himself in that whining tone. My heart was hammering again. I tried to convince myself this was a psychiatric issue and that he might need professional help, but there was something else that freaked me out. Occasionally, there was a third voice, but it didn't sound like him at all. It was softer but had a strange, raspy edge. I couldn't make out the words. It was like a muffled whisper that came and went. Around 2 a.m. I reached my limit. My walls were shaking from whatever he was doing. I grabbed my phone, walked out into the hallway, and knocked on his door. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. My legs felt shaky, but I was too frustrated and tired to think straight. For a moment, the noises stopped. Then I heard his footsteps approach the door. He opened it just an inch. I saw his eye peering through the gap. He whispered, "Leave us alone," in that same raspy voice I'd heard earlier. Before I could respond, he slammed the door so hard it rattled in the frame. I stood there, a chill running through my body. I decided I had to inform the landlord in the morning. I went back inside, locked the door, and double-checked all my windows. I barely slept that night. My heart kept pounding, and every little creak in my unit made me jump. In the morning, I left for work early so I could catch the landlord in his office downstairs. He listened to me politely but didn't seem surprised. He said something about the neighbor having a history of outbursts, but that he always paid rent on time and never caused serious issues. I told him about the screaming, the pounding on the walls, and the weird whispered threats. The landlord said he'd look into it. His tone suggested he didn't want to get too involved. It was frustrating, but at least I'd reported it. I went to work feeling tense and drained. That afternoon, I came home to find a note taped to my door. It was a piece of lined paper folded in half. On the outside, there was just my unit number, 303. Inside, I saw 3 words in shaky handwriting. "You are next." There was no signature. I felt a jolt in my gut. My first reaction was to scan the hallway, but I didn't see anyone. I rushed inside and locked the door. My hands were trembling and I could feel sweat on my forehead. I tried to calm down by telling myself anyone could have left that note. But in my mind, I pictured my neighbor's face, that wild expression he had in the hallway. The rest of the evening, I stayed in my living room, not making a sound. I felt like if I turned on music or the TV, I wouldn't hear him coming if he tried something. Around 9 p.m., I heard a knock on my door. It wasn't loud, more like a soft tapping. I froze. I stood up and walked slowly to the door. I looked through the peephole. My neighbor was standing there, his head leaning against the door. He wasn't moving, but I could see his lips twitching. He kept muttering something. I couldn't make it out. My palms were sweaty, and my heart thudded. I didn't want to open the door. After a few moments, he stopped tapping and whispered, "You're not safe." Then he leaned away from the door and walked back to his apartment. I waited until I heard his door close before I let out the breath I'd been holding. From that point on, I tried to avoid him at all costs. I started leaving earlier for work and coming home later. I'd step softly in the hallway, listening for any sign of him. The building felt oppressive. I hated walking past his door, even though I had to if I wanted to get to the stairs. I'd hear him talking to himself at odd hours. Sometimes it sounded like an argument, other times like a frantic conversation. On a few occasions, I heard sobbing. It was loud and pained. More than once, I almost knocked on his door to check if he was okay, but then I remembered the threats. Something in my gut told me to stay away. One night, I heard him dragging something heavy around his apartment again. The scraping noise went on for at least an hour. Then it stopped. I listened through the wall, pressing my ear against it. I heard quiet breathing, then a sudden burst of laughter. It was that same choking laughter as before. I jumped back from the wall. My hands were clammy, and there was a tingling sensation in my chest. I decided I had to call the police. I couldn't handle this alone. When the operator asked for details, I explained the noise, the threats, and the notes. They said they'd send someone to check it out. 2 officers showed up about half an hour later. I led them to his door. They knocked, identifying themselves. At first, there was silence. Then he opened the door just enough to peek out. His face looked calm, and he greeted the officers politely. He said he had no idea what they were talking about. He claimed he was sleeping and suggested maybe I was hearing things from another unit. The officers asked if they could look around. He agreed, but asked them to remove their shoes. I thought that was odd, but the officers complied. They went inside and were gone for a few minutes. I stood in the hallway, my stomach in knots. When they came back out, one officer shrugged and said they didn't see anything suspicious. The neighbor followed them to the door with a kind, apologetic smile. He said, "I'm sorry, my neighbor misunderstood some noises. I move my furniture sometimes to clean underneath." The officers told me to call again if I heard anything else, but they didn't seem convinced. My neighbor closed his door after they left, and I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. After that, things got worse. He started knocking on my door at random times. Sometimes it was late at night, other times very early in the morning. Whenever I checked, he wouldn't be there, but I'd hear him laughing softly down the hallway. One evening when I came home, I found scratches on my door. Long, thin marks as if someone had dragged a key across it. I ran my finger over them. The paint chipped off easily, leaving raw lines. My heart pounded and my mouth went dry. I dialed the landlord's number and left a message, telling him I needed more help with this situation. He never called me back. I tried talking to some of the other neighbors, but most of them either weren't home or pretended they didn't know what I was talking about. I suspected they all heard weird noises, but maybe they were too scared to get involved. I spent the next few days feeling paranoid. Every time I heard a creak or a door open in the hallway, I tensed up. My muscles were sore from being on edge all the time. I noticed I was clenching my jaw in my sleep. One night, around 1 a.m., I woke up to a loud crash against our shared wall. Then I heard him screaming at the top of his lungs. It was a panicked, angry scream. I bolted out of bed, threw on some clothes, and rushed into the hallway. I don't know why I did that. My instinct told me to check if something horrible had happened. The hallway was empty, but I could still hear him yelling inside his apartment. He was saying, "Get out. I told you to leave. You're not wanted." Then, he switched to a quieter voice, saying, "No, no, no," over and over. I stepped closer to his door. My mind was screaming at me to back off, but my legs kept moving. I heard a smack, like he'd hit the wall, followed by his heavy breathing. Suddenly, the door swung open and he stood there with a blank look on his face. I froze. He stared at me, then his expression changed to pure rage. He stepped forward. I stumbled back, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. He leaned toward me and hissed, "I am not alone." Then he grabbed the doorknob and slammed the door in my face. I almost fell backward. My legs felt weak. I hurried back to my apartment, triple-locked the door, and slid down to the floor with my back against it. My chest was heaving, and I noticed my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I kept hearing him pace around. I waited for morning. When the sun finally came up, I stepped outside to breathe in the fresh air and try to steady my nerves. I knew I couldn't go on living like this. I'd never felt such constant fear and anxiety. I realized I had to leave this place or figure out a way to force the landlord to take action. But as of now, I'm still here, still hearing him through these thin walls. Every time I walk past his door, I feel like something is watching me from inside, waiting for a chance to make me regret staying. I haven't solved anything yet. I'm just hoping nothing worse happens before I can get out. That's the whole story so far. It's not dramatic in the sense of a crime scene or anything. There's no blood. There's no big confrontation with the police. There's just this constant tension, this sick feeling in my stomach that something's very wrong. Sometimes I think it might be a serious psychiatric issue, maybe a personality disorder. Other times I can't shake the impression that there's something else, something harder to explain, living in there with him. And every time I hear that dragging sound late at night, I wonder if I'm going to wake up to find more scratches on my door or worse. For now, I'm just trying to keep my head down and endure it until I can figure out my next move. It's the only thing I can do.